Hello, I am the Wizard of Tales, and I'm here to guide you today. I know this video is the perfect companion to help my dear dreamers relax and drift off to sleep. Before we dive into a world of calm and serenity, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, get cozy, take a deep breath, and let the magic of stories embrace you. In the small village of Vale das Sombras, where stone and wooden houses huddle together on the steep slopes of the mountains, lived the Silva family. João and Maria Silva already had 6 children to feed when they found out that a 7th was on the way. The news, which should have brought joy, brought tears to Maria's tired eyes as she looked at the increasingly empty pantry and the hungry faces of her little ones. The winter that year was particularly cruel. The biting wind whistled through the gaps in the poorly sealed windows, and snow covered the fields where John used to work as a farmer. Maria's belly grew with the couple's worry. The older children started skipping meals, saying they weren't hungry so that the younger ones could eat a bit more. The night the baby decided to come into the world, a storm was lashing the village. The local midwife, Dona Rosa, arrived soaking wet at the Silva home, bringing with her herbs and knowledge passed down from generation to generation. The labor was long and difficult, and when the newborn's cry finally echoed through the house, something strange happened. A tall, slender figure materialized in the room. Its black cloak seemed to be made of living shadows, and where there should have been a face, there was only deep darkness. John and Mary were paralyzed with fear, but death, for it was death itself, raised its hands in a gesture of peace. Fear not, her voice was surprisingly soft, like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. I have come with a proposal. I see the suffering of this family, the daily struggle for survival. Let me be this child's godmother. Maria, still weak from childbirth, clutched the baby to her chest. Why would Death want to be a child's godmother? She asked in a trembling voice. Because I am the fairest of godmothers, replied the shadowy figure. Rich or poor, young or old, all are equal to me. And to my godson, I will give a special gift. He will be able to see when I am present with the sick. If he sees me at the bedside, death is certain. If he's at my feet, there's a chance of a cure. John and Mary looked at each other. The offer was tempting. Having Death as a godmother would mean protection and a valuable gift that could lift the family out of poverty. After a moment of tense silence, they agreed. The baby was christened Miguel, and Death kept his promise. As he grew up, the boy showed a special sensitivity to the sick and needy. At the age of 12, he was already helping Dona Rosa with her healing work, showing a natural talent for medicine. Miguel grew up observing the suffering around him. He saw his older brothers leaving one by one to look for work in larger villages, while the younger ones continued to struggle against daily hunger. His gift, initially a family secret, began to manifest itself more clearly when he reached adolescence. The first time she saw her godmother with a sick person was when she was 15. A child in the village had a high fever, and when Miguel entered the room, he saw the shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed. Following his instinct, he prepared a tea with the herbs Dona Rosa had taught him, and in a few days the child was cured. Her fame began to spread. People whispered about the young healer, who seemed to know exactly who could be saved and who was doomed. Miguel never revealed the true source of his knowledge, but used his gift to help everyone he could. Years passed, and Miguel became a respected doctor, studying in a larger city thanks to the money he managed to make from his cures. His success allowed him to help his family, and the Silva household finally saw better days. However, his gift also carried an enormous weight. Seeing death regularly and knowing that, in some cases, nothing could be done was a heavy burden to carry. It was at this time that he met Anna, a young teacher who had arrived in the Valley of Shadows to teach at the small local school. Her smile brightened the darkest days, and for the first time Miguel felt that his heart beat for something other than medicine. Anna also fell for the kind and dedicated doctor, and soon the two were in love. But fate, or perhaps his godmother, had other plans. One rainy afternoon, Anna started coughing up blood. Miguel rushed to examine her and his heart froze when he saw the familiar figure of his godmother standing at her bedside. At that moment, he realized that he would be tested in a way he had never imagined. He would have to choose between respecting the pact with death or trying to save the love of his life. The decision he would make would change not only his fate, but also his understanding of life, death, and the limits of love. The young doctor who grew up under death's protection was about to discover that some gifts come with a very high price, and that some rules are not meant to be broken. Miguel spent days and nights by Anna's side, desperately searching for a way to save her. The cough persisted, and red spots began to appear on her handkerchiefs with increasing frequency. His medical knowledge indicated tuberculosis, a disease that had claimed so many lives in the Valley of Shadows. In her desperation, she began researching alternative treatments, consulting every book she could find. The nights were long, lit only by flickering candlelight as he leafed through the yellowed pages of ancient medical grimoires. Anna, though weakened, kept her gentle smile, trying to comfort Miguel in his moments of anguish. "You need to rest," she said in a hoarse voice between bouts of coughing. "You can't look after others if you don't look after yourself." But Miguel barely listened, consumed by his obsessive search for a cure. During his vigils, the constant presence of his godmother at Anna's bedside tormented him. The shadowy figure remained motionless, like a statue of darkness, silently reminding him of the pact they had made. Sometimes Miguel thought he saw a glimmer of compassion in the depths of the black hood, but perhaps it was just his imagination desperate for comfort. The news of Anna's illness spread through the village, and soon the small house where she lived was filled with wild flowers and small gifts from the students who loved her so much. The children asked every day when their teacher would return to school, and their innocent voices were like daggers in Miguel's heart. It was on one of these afternoons, while watching a group of children leave more flowers on the doorstep, that Miguel had an idea. If he couldn't change Anna's fate through conventional medicine, perhaps he could deceive death itself. After all, his godmother had given him the gift of seeing her presence, but had never specified that he could not interfere with her position. Carefully, he began to work out his plan. During the following visits, he noticed that his godmother always appeared at the same time. When the sun was beginning to set, she studied the room thoroughly, memorizing every detail of the simple furniture. The dark wooden bed, the weathered bedside table, the old armchair where she spent her waking nights. On a particularly difficult afternoon, when Anna's breathing was more labored than usual, Miguel put his plan into action. With the help of two strong men from the village, he turned the bed 180 degrees so that the headboard and feet switched positions. His heart was racing as he waited for the sun to set. When death appeared, as he always did, Miguel felt a shiver run down his spine. For the first time since receiving his gift, he was consciously trying to deceive his godmother. The shadowy figure took up its usual position, but now, due to the new layout of the bed, it was at Anna's feet, not at the headboard. For a moment, Miguel believed that his plan had worked. Anna's breathing seemed to improve slightly, and a rosy color returned to her cheeks. However, the joy was short-lived. Death remained motionless for a few moments before slowly turning towards her. "My godson," her voice sounded colder than usual, like the biting winter wind. "Do you really believe you can fool me with such simple tricks?" Miguel felt his legs go weak. "Godmother," he pleaded, "I love you. I can't lose you." "Love is powerful," replied Death. "But there are laws that not even it can break. You of all people should understand that. Your gift was not granted so that you could defy the natural order of things." His godmother's words weighed on Miguel like a shroud. He knew she was right, but his heart refused to accept it. "There must be something I can do," he insisted, his voice trembling with emotion. Death remained silent for a long moment before replying. "There are always choices, my godson, but every choice has its price. Are you willing to pay whatever it takes to save her?" Miguel didn't hesitate. "Anything. Even your gift? Even our connection?" The question took him by surprise. His gift had defined his entire adult life, had allowed him to help hundreds of people, to lift his family out of poverty. It was a fundamental part of who he was. But as he looked at Anna, asleep and fragile in her bed, he knew he had no choice. "Yes," He replied firmly, "That's right." Death inclined his head slightly, in a gesture that could have been as much approval as regret. "Remember, my godson, that some choices cannot be undone, and some blessings, once renounced, never return." Miguel nodded, feeling the weight of his decision. What was about to happen would change his life forever, but if it meant saving Anna, he was willing to sacrifice everything. Night fell over the Valley of Shadows, and with it, Miguel and Anna's fate was about to be sealed in a way that neither of them could have imagined. The atmosphere in the room thickened as Death raised his skeletal hands towards Miguel. A dark mist began to form around him, and he felt an intense chill run through his body. It was as if something was being ripped from his soul, his gift, his connection to his godmother, dripping like water between his fingers. Anna began to breathe more easily, her color visibly improving as the process continued. Miguel, on the other hand, felt weaker and weaker, his legs barely able to support him. When he finally fell to his knees, the shadowy figure of his godmother had disappeared, and for the first time in years, he could no longer feel her presence. The next few days were a time of adjustment. Anna recovered completely, to the amazement of everyone in the village. Miguel, meanwhile, had to relearn how to be a doctor without his special gift. Every diagnosis was now a challenge, every treatment an uncertainty. He found himself studying even more, consulting colleagues, looking for signs and symptoms that had previously been obvious to him. News of his loss of skills spread quickly. Some patients, who had previously blindly trusted his judgment, started looking for other doctors. Miguel's pride suffered, but Anna's smile and constant presence helped him get through each difficult moment. "You saved me," she often said, holding his hands between hers. "Now it's my turn to be by your side as you find your way again." However, the loss of the gift brought consequences that Miguel had not foreseen. Without his special ability, he began to doubt every medical decision he made. The fear of making a mistake, of failing to save someone who could be saved, consumed him. The nights became restless, filled with nightmares where pale faces accused him of failing them. It was during this turbulent period that Dona Rosa, the old midwife who had taught him about medicinal herbs in his youth, fell seriously ill. Miguel was called to attend to her, but without her gift, he felt completely lost. The woman who had been like a second mother to him now depended on his purely human abilities. "My boy," whispered Dona Rosa, her voice weak but still full of wisdom. "You always had the gift of healing, even before your godmother came along. What she gave you was just a tool, but your true talent comes from your heart." Those words touched Miguel deeply. He began to remember all the years of learning, all the lessons Dona Rosa had taught him about medicinal plants, about observing patients, about trusting his own instincts. He realized that he had become too dependent on his supernatural gift, forgetting the natural abilities he had developed. With renewed determination, Miguel immersed himself in his traditional medical studies. Anna helped him organize his notes, research new treatments, and, most importantly, reminded him to rest when he overdid it. Together, they transformed a room in the house into a small medical library, filled with books and journals that Miguel obtained through correspondence in larger cities. The couple married in a simple ceremony the following spring. The entire Valley of Shadows attended, and even those who had doubted Miguel after the loss of his gift began to recognize his renewed dedication to medicine. His reputation began to rebuild, no longer based on supernatural abilities, but on solid knowledge and genuine care for his patients. Anna returned to school, now stronger than ever, and her classes took on a new dimension when she began to include basic health and hygiene lessons for her students. Miguel occasionally visited the school to give short talks on disease prevention, turning medical knowledge into something accessible for the children. However, in his lonelier hours, Miguel still missed his connection with death, not because of the power it gave him, but because of the certainty that accompanied each diagnosis. There were nights when he would wake up startled, instinctively looking for the familiar presence of his godmother, only to be reminded of the sacrifice he had made. Anna noticed these moments of melancholy and found a unique way to help him. She began to keep a diary of the cases Miguel had successfully treated, documenting every recovery, every life saved through her conventional medical knowledge. "You see," she would say, showing him the filled pages, "you don't need supernatural gifts to make a difference." Life in the Valley of Shadows took its course, and gradually Miguel found a new rhythm in his medical practice. He learned to trust his natural instincts more, to observe each patient more closely, and to accept that uncertainty was part of medicine. The community, in turn, came to respect him not for his mysterious powers, but for his tireless dedication and genuine compassion. Meanwhile, in the shadows beyond human perception, a dark figure watched his godson with something that could be interpreted as pride. Michael's sacrifice had proved something that Death already knew, that true healing power did not come from supernatural gifts, but from love and dedication to others. However, this would not be the last time their paths would cross, for some bonds, even when apparently broken, remain eternally interwoven in the fabric of fate. The years passed in the Valley of Shadows, and Miguel and Ana built the life together that exceeded their most optimistic expectations. Miguel's practice, now established in a larger house near the center of the village, has become a place of hope for the locals. Even without his supernatural gift, he had developed an extraordinary medical intuition based on years of careful observation and constant study. Ana had transformed the local school into a learning center that went beyond letters and numbers. Her lessons on basic health and hygiene began to show practical results. The village's children were getting sick less often, and their parents began to adopt healthier practices in their homes. One particularly cold fall morning, Miguel was awoken by urgent knocks on his door. It was a miner covered in dust and wide-eyed with panic. "Doctor, there's been a cave-in in the mine. There are several men trapped, some seriously injured." Miguel felt his heart racing. Ever since he lost his gift, accidents with multiple victims had been his biggest challenge. Not being able to see death meant having to make difficult decisions about who to prioritize for treatment. Even so, years of experience had taught him to remain calm in emergency situations. He quickly gathered his medical equipment and herbs, while Anna prepared bandages and clean water. The couple had developed an effective partnership in emergencies. She helped him with first aid, her calm presence helping both the patients and Miguel himself. When they arrived at the mine, the scene was chaotic. Men covered in dust and blood were being carried out of the partially collapsed tunnel. Desperate relatives crowded around, and the air was heavy with dust and fear. Miguel momentarily missed his gift. How much easier it would have been to know exactly who needed the most urgent attention. But there was no time for regrets. He began to examine the wounded methodically, prioritizing those with the most serious injuries. Anna organized a triage system, using her teaching skills to coordinate the volunteers who arrived to help. Among the injured was Joao, Dona Rosa's eldest son, who Miguel had helped bring into the world years ago. His body was crushed by a beam, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. Without his gift, Miguel couldn't tell if death was at his head or at his feet, but his years of experience told him that the situation was serious. While working tirelessly to save lives, Miguel began to notice something strange. A familiar, almost forgotten sensation began to manifest itself. It was like a tingling at the base of his neck, a peripheral awareness he hadn't felt for years. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a familiar shadow in the corner of his vision. He concentrated on his work, attributing the sensation to stress and exhaustion. The hours dragged by as he and Anna struggled to stabilize the most seriously injured. The sun was already setting when the last miner was rescued, and the final count was painful: 3 dead and 12 injured, some in critical condition. That night, while caring for the most serious patients in his makeshift clinic, Miguel finally understood what he was feeling. His connection with death, although much weaker than before, had not completely disappeared. It was like a distant echo, a muscle memory of his former gift. Perhaps, he thought, some bonds are too strong to be completely severed. The realization didn't bring back his former power, but it did offer a different kind of comfort. His sacrifice for Anna had not been in vain, but neither had it been a definitive sentence of separation from his godmother. Anna noticed the change in her husband in the days that followed. There was a new confidence in his medical decisions. a balance between natural intuition and acquired knowledge. "You look different," she commented one evening as they changed Joao's bandages. Miguel smiled softly. "I realized that I was never really alone on my journey," he replied. "The gift I received was only part of who I am as a doctor. The real gift was learning to trust in my own ability to help others." As the injured miners recovered, stories began to circulate around the Valley of Shadows. They spoke of how the doctor seemed to know exactly what each patient needed, how his presence brought peace even in the most difficult times. Some even whispered that his old gift had returned, but Miguel knew the truth. He had found a new kind of strength, born of the union between human knowledge and a more subtle connection with the mystery of life and death. John, against all expectations, began to show signs of recovery. His survival and rehabilitation became a symbol of hope for the village, proof that medicine, even without supernatural powers, could work miracles when practiced with dedication and love. Sometimes on the quietest nights, when Miguel made his rounds of the inpatients, he felt that familiar presence hovering in the shadows. It was no longer the clear and defined gift of before, but a deeper and more subtle understanding of the mysteries of life and death. It was as if his godmother, even after his sacrifice, had never really abandoned him, only changed the form of her guidance. With the recovery of the miners and the new understanding of his changed gift, Miguel found a balance he had never imagined possible. His clinic was thriving, and together with Anna, they had become fundamental pillars of the Valley of Shadows community. However, fate still had one last lesson in store for the doctor and his peculiar connection with death. One spring afternoon, while picking medicinal herbs in the fields surrounding the village, Miguel came across a young woman sitting under an ancient tree. Her black dress contrasted with the colorful landscape, and something about her presence seemed strangely familiar. "Hello, godson," said the young woman, her voice soft as the whisper of the wind among the leaves. She was his godmother, but in a form he had never seen before, more human, more approachable. Miguel sat down next to her, feeling that familiar tingle at the back of his neck intensify. "Why are you here?" he asked, noticing how the flowers around them seemed to be wilting slightly. "I've come to show you something," she replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've learned a lot since you renounced your original gift, but there's still one last lesson to be shared." She reached out and gently touched Miguel's forehead. Instantly, his vision expanded in an extraordinary way. He could see golden threads of light connecting all living things, plants, animals, people. It was a complex and delicate web of life, pulsating with energy. "What are you showing me?" he asked, amazed at the sight. "The true nature of life and death," explained his godmother. "They are not opposites as many people think, but part of the same cycle. Your original gift allowed you to see my presence, but this new understanding will show you something much deeper." Miguel watched as some of the golden threads gradually faded, while others shone more brightly. He understood that he was seeing the natural flow of life: birth, growth, decline, and death, all connected in an infinite pattern. "Your sacrifice for Anna was not just an act of love," Death continued. "It was a catalyst for your evolution as a healer. You learned that true healing doesn't just come from knowing when someone is going to die, but from a deep understanding of the balance between life and death." In the days that followed, Miguel began to notice subtle changes in his way of practicing medicine. His intuition became even sharper, but in a different way. It was no longer a question of seeing death at the head or foot of the bed, but of understanding the vital flow of each patient. Anna noticed the transformation in her husband. "Your eyes look different," she commented one evening as they prepared medicinal herbs together, "as if you could see beyond what's on the surface." Miguel smiled, hugging her. "I've learned that true healing isn't just about fighting death, but understanding its role in the cycle of life. Each person we treat is part of something bigger, an interconnected web of existence." His new understanding led him to develop a more holistic approach to medicine. He began teaching his patients about balance between rest and activity, eating and fasting, work and leisure. The clinic became a healing center that treated not only physical ailments, but also offered comfort for the soul. The Valley of Shadows also began to change. Under the guidance of Miguel and Anna, the residents developed a new relationship with life and death. The funeral rituals, which had previously been filled only with sadness, began to include celebrations of the life lived. People learned to accept death as a natural part of existence, without losing hope or love for life. One starry night, while walking home after attending a difficult birth, Miguel felt his godmother's presence again. She was different now. Neither the shadowy figure of their first meetings, nor the young woman from the field of flowers, but something in between. "You finally understand," she said, her voice mingling with the night wind. "The real gift was never seeing my presence, but understanding the balance between the worlds." Miguel nodded, watching the stars above. "Every life I help bring into the world, every death I witness, every healing I perform, it's all part of a greater cycle. And that's why you were chosen as my godson," replied Death. "Not to have power over life and death, but to be a guardian of balance, a healer who understands both the preciousness of life and the naturalness of death." When he got home, he found Anna asleep in her favorite chair, a storybook on her lap. The moonlight bathed her serene face, and Miguel could see the golden threads of life shining around her, strong and vibrant. His sacrifice years ago had not been a loss, but a transformation, the beginning of a deeper understanding of his role as a doctor and as a human being. The Valley of Shadows remained his home, a place where life and death danced in delicate balance, and where a doctor, blessed with a unique gift, learned that the greatest power lies not in controlling fate, but in understanding and accepting its natural flow. And on the quietest nights, when the wind whispered through the trees, Miguel knew that his godmother was always close by, no longer as a presence to be feared, but as an old friend who had guided him on a journey of discovery and transformation. In the bustling streets of Agrabah, where the intense sun turned the sand into a golden carpet, Aladdin leapt nimbly between the market stalls. His bare feet already knew every stone and every shortcut in the city that was both his home and his playground. With his shaggy black hair and threadbare clothes, he might have looked like just another young beggar to the hurried shopkeepers, but his charismatic smile and sparkling eyes revealed a different soul. "Catch thief!" The cry echoed through the market as Aladdin, with a loaf of newly acquired bread under his arm, deftly dodged the crowd. Beside him, his faithful companion Abu, a small brown-furred monkey, chirped excitedly, also carrying his share of the booty. "It's not stealing to survive, is it, Abu?" Aladdin winked at his furry friend as he dodged down a narrow alleyway. The furious vendor lagged behind, shaking his fists in the air. For Aladdin, every day was a new adventure on the streets of Agrabah, even if not always for the noblest of reasons. At the same moment, inside the majestic palace that towered over the city like a glittering jewel, Princess Jasmine watched the horizon from her golden balcony. Her long black hair danced in the brief desert breeze, while her pet tiger, Raja, rested lazily at her feet. The princess sighed, bored with the walls that imprisoned her and the rules that dictated her life. "Another suitor today, Raja," she murmured, stroking the tiger's head. "Another arrogant prince who only sees a crown, not a person." The animal growled in sympathy. The laws of the kingdom were clear. Jasmine had to marry a prince before her next birthday, which was fast approaching. Meanwhile, in the depths of the palace, Grand Vizier Jafar was plodding in his gloomy office. Tall and slender, with his black and red robes and snake-shaped staff, he was the embodiment of ambition. Next to him, Iago, his sarcastic red parrot, watched as the vizier consulted ancient scrolls. "The lamp must be somewhere, Iago," Jafar muttered, his black eyes shining with malice. "And when I find it, not even the Sultan can stand in the way of my destiny to rule Agrabah." His obsession with the legendary magic lamp grew by the day, as did his plans to usurp the throne. Back on the streets, Aladdin finally reached his refuge, an abandoned building at the top of the city with a privileged view of the palace. Sharing his bread with Abu, He watched the sun set over the golden domes. "Look at that, Abu," he said, pointing to the palace. "People with so much, while others have so little." The monkey nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "One day, friend, things will be different. One day we'll live in a palace, have servants and treasures." His reverie was interrupted by a commotion in the streets below. A new prince was arriving to woo the princess, his extravagant entourage pushing people out of the way. Aladdin watched with disgust at the display of arrogance. The next day, Aladdin was again in the market streets when he saw something that would change his life forever. A little girl was crying after a cruel shopkeeper snatched an apple from her hands. Without thinking twice, Aladdin grabbed an apple from another stall and handed it to the little girl, who smiled gratefully before running off. It was at that moment that he saw her, a young woman of extraordinary beauty, watching the scene with approval. Jasmine had escaped from the palace, disguised in simple clothes, determined to experience life beyond the royal walls. Their gazes met, and something inexplicable passed between them. Before Aladdin could approach, palace guards appeared, searching for the missing princess. In the ensuing confusion, a mysterious old man approached Aladdin, whispering about a magical cave in the desert and a treasure that could change his life. "Only someone with a pure heart can enter the Cave of Wonders," said the old man, who was actually Jafar in disguise. "Someone like you, young man." Aladdin, still thinking about the mysterious market girl and dreaming of a better life, didn't notice the malice in the old man's eyes. He accepted the proposal, unaware that he was about to be involved in an adventure far greater than he could have imagined. That night, as the moon illuminated the desert dunes, Aladdin and Abu followed the mysterious old man out of the city. The Cave of Wonders appeared out of the sand like an apparition, the head of an enormous tiger with eyes as bright as rubies. "Remember," warned the old man, "bring me only the lamp. All the rest of the treasure you find will be yours." His words were honey, but they hid poison. Aladdin looked at Abu, who was clinging nervously to his shoulder. "Well, friend, what could possibly go wrong?" He smiled, trying to hide his own apprehension. With a determined step, he crossed the fangs of the cave, descending into the mysterious depths that would change his fate forever. What he didn't know was that that night would mark the beginning of a journey that would test not only his courage, but also his character. A story where he would discover that true riches don't always shine the brightest, and that love can be found in the most unexpected places. Meanwhile, above the city, Princess Jasmine was also thinking about the kind young man she had met in the market, without imagining that their paths were about to cross in ways that neither of them could have foreseen. The darkness of the Cave of Wonders engulfed Aladdin and Abu as they descended a long stone staircase. The young man held a torch that the mysterious old man had given him, its dancing flames casting sinister shadows on the ancient walls. Abu clung tightly to his friend's shoulder, his small eyes wide with apprehension. "Calm down, Abu," whispered Aladdin, trying to sound more confident than he really felt. "Think of all the treasures we could find down here. We'll never have to steal to eat again." As they advanced, the cave opened up into a gigantic chamber that took Aladdin's breath away. Mountains of gold, jewels, and precious artifacts stretched as far as the eye could see, shining like earthly stars in the light of his torch. Abu immediately jumped off Aladdin's shoulder, mesmerized by an enormous ruby the size of an orange. "Abu no," Aladdin warned, remembering the old man's warning. "We can only touch the lamp, remember?" The monkey pouted, but reluctantly moved away from the tempting jewel. As they crossed the sea of riches, Aladdin couldn't help thinking about the girl in the market. With all that wealth, perhaps he could impress her, offer her a life of comfort and luxury. His thoughts were interrupted when something caught his eye, an ornate carpet floating a few centimeters above the ground. "Abu, do you see that?" Aladdin rubbed his eyes in disbelief. The carpet, realizing it had been noticed, waved one of its tassels as if greeting the visitors. "It's a flying carpet, a magic carpet." The carpet approached gracefully, making a theatrical bow that drew laughter from Aladdin. Abu, initially frightened, soon found himself fascinated by his new magical companion. The carpet began to make animated gestures, as if it wanted to show them something. "Do you know where the lamp is?" asked Aladdin. The carpet nodded vigorously and began to float towards a distant staircase. "Good. Show me the way, friend." Outside the cave, Jafar maintained his elder disguise, but his patience was beginning to wear thin. "That brat is taking too long," he grumbled to Iago, who was hiding in his robes. "The lamp should be in my hands before dawn." Back inside the cave, Aladdin, Abu, and their new magical friend reached an isolated chamber. In the center, on a high stone pedestal, rested an old, unadorned bronze lamp. Mysterious rays of light converged on it, as if the whole place had been built to protect this simple object. "All this way, for that old lamp," Aladdin commented, carefully climbing the steps of the pedestal. Abu made a sound of disappointment, clearly more interested in the treasures they had left behind. When Aladdin finally picked up the lamp, a strange sensation ran through his body, as if he were holding something alive and pulsating. Before he could examine his discovery further, a high-pitched scream echoed through the chamber. Abu had succumbed to temptation and grabbed a huge red jewel. The ground began to shake violently, and a thunderous voice reverberated throughout the cave. "You have perverted the forbidden treasure. Now you will suffer the consequences." "Abu, what have you done?" Aladdin shouted, as the walls began to crumble and bubbling lava gushed out of the ground. The flying carpet quickly glided towards them, offering an escape route. The desperate escape through the collapsing cave was a blur of movement and chaos. The carpet zigzagged between collapsing pillars and jets of lava, while Aladdin clung tightly to the lamp with one hand and Abu with the other. Behind them, a veritable tsunami of treasure and destruction was chasing them. "I can see the way out," Aladdin shouted hopefully, spotting moonlight through the cave's fangs. However, a giant rock came crashing down on the carpet, throwing them into a wall. Aladdin managed to cling to a rocky ledge, but was rapidly losing strength. Up above, the old man held out his wrinkled hand. "Quickly, young man, give me the lamp, and I'll pull you up. Hang on up," Aladdin shouted, trying to reach the outstretched hand while protecting his furry friend. With a lot of effort, he managed to hand the lamp to the old man, who immediately changed his worried expression to one of evil triumph. "Finally," Jafar exclaimed, his voice returning to normal as he ripped off his disguise. "After all these years, you," Aladdin gasped, recognizing the dreaded vizier of the palace. Before he could react, Jafar stepped on his toes with force. "Your reward for your services," he laughed cruelly, watching Aladdin and Abu plummet into the darkness of the collapsing cave. The flying carpet dived after them, tried to catch up, but it was too late. The last thing Aladdin saw before losing consciousness was Jafar's triumphant face disappearing as the cave entrance closed forever, sealing them in the dark depths. Hours passed before Aladdin regained consciousness. He was lying in a small natural cave, dimly lit by phosphorescent crystals on the walls. Abu and the flying carpet were beside him, the monkey anxiously trying to wake him up. "I'm fine, Abu," Aladdin groaned, slowly sitting up. "But we're stuck down here." His gaze wandered around the cave until he noticed something glowing in a corner. The lamp. Apparently, during the confusion, Abu had managed to steal it back from Jafar. "You're amazing, you know that?" Aladdin laughed, hugging his little friend. Picking up the lamp, he noticed an almost faded inscription on its surface. "There's something written here, but it's very dirty." He began to rub the lamp with the sleeve of his robe, without imagining that this simple gesture was about to change his life forever. The lamp began to shake in his hands, emanating a bright blue light. Colored smoke poured out of the nozzle, filling the small cave as a powerful, jovial voice echoed. "A year, 10,000 years can give you quite a Kate." The blue smoke gradually solidified into the shape of a colossal, imposing figure with bright blue skin and a small black tuft on his head. The genius, as he introduced himself with a theatrical bow, filled the small cave with his magnetic presence and exuberant personality. "Wow, wow, wow, look what we have here," the genie exclaimed, materializing several spotlights that illuminated Aladdin. "My new master, Allow me to introduce myself properly. With a snap of his fingers, a lively tune began to play out of nowhere as the genie multiplied into several versions of himself, each with a different instrument. Aladdin and Abu watched in amazement as the genie performed a musical number explaining the rules of the 3 wishes. Rule number 1, I can't kill anyone. Rule number 2, I can't make anyone fall in love. And rule number 3, I can't bring anyone back from the dead. Other than that, just ask. 3 wishes? Aladdin asked, still trying to process the surreal situation. Anything? Well, there are some limitations as I mentioned in the song, which by the way was sensational, don't you think? The genie winked, prompting a small audience of applause. But yes, practically anything. Riches, fame, power. Although I'd always suggest starting with getting out of this cave considering the circumstances. Aladdin smiled cunningly. What if I don't use a wish to get out of here? What if you take us out of the goodness of your heart? The genie was momentarily speechless before bursting into laughter. Ah, that's clever. It's been a long time since I've met a master with a sense of humor. But okay, you win, kid. I'll get you out of here for free, as a courtesy to the house. With one dramatic movement, the genie transformed into a rocket, grabbed Aladdin, Abu and the carpet, and shot through the ceiling of the cave, punching through layers and layers of rock until they emerged in an oasis in the middle of the desert, under the starry sky. And here we are, announced the genie, returning to his original form. Now about those 3 wishes. Aladdin sat on the edge of a small pond, thinking deeply. The image of the mysterious market girl, who he still didn't know was Princess Jasmine, danced in his mind. Genie, have you ever fallen in love? The question took the magical being by surprise. His usually playful expression softened. Well, in 10,000 years you end up seeing a lot of love pass by. But personally, let's just say it's hard to maintain a relationship when you live in a lamp. There's this girl, Aladdin began, and the genie immediately transformed into a therapist with glasses and a notepad. She's amazing, but she's a princess, and the law says she can only marry a prince. Ah, the classic forbidden love dilemma, Genie exclaimed dramatically. You know, there's a very obvious solution to that. He snapped his fingers, and suddenly Aladdin found himself dressed in luxurious royal clothes. Can you turn me into a prince? Aladdin's eyes lit up at the possibility. I can turn you into anything you want, boy. Prince, king, emperor, even a movie critic, although I wouldn't recommend the last option. The genie joked, making royal poses. Aladdin stood up, excited. So, genie, I wish you to turn me into the richest and most powerful Prince Agrabah has ever seen. Your wishes are my orders, master. With a grand gesture, the genie began to weave his magic. Rays of colored light enveloped Aladdin, transforming his shabby clothes into a white and gold costume worthy of royalty. Abu was transformed into an elegant elephant, while magical fireworks exploded in the night sky. Presenting, announced the genie in an announcer's voice, His Royal Highness, Prince Ali Ababwa. Meanwhile, in the palace, Jafar was furious. His frantic search for the lamp in his chambers had yielded no results. That miserable monkey must have stolen it, he vociferated, knocking objects off his desk. Maybe it's time to change tack, suggested Iado, his parrot. The princess still has to get married before the next sunset. Jafar's eyes twinkled with mischief. Yes, perhaps it's time to convince the Sultan to see things my way. His snake-shaped staff began to glow ominously. The next morning, Agrabah awoke to an unprecedented spectacle. A grand procession was crossing the city streets, led by a young prince on a majestic white elephant. Dancers, musicians, and servants handed out gold coins to the amazed populace. The genie, disguised as a royal advisor, enthusiastically coordinated the show, occasionally transforming himself into different people in the crowd to start chants of Prince Ali. Magnificent is he, Ali Ababwa. At the palace, Jasmine watched the procession from her balcony with disinterest. Just another arrogant prince, she sighed to Raja. However, there was something familiar about that young man that she couldn't quite identify. Aladdin or Prince Ali felt his heart racing as he approached the palace. Under all that luxury and pomp, he was still the same boy from the streets, dreaming of winning the heart of a princess. What he didn't know was that his journey of self-discovery had only just begun, and that the greatest lessons about love, honesty, and courage were yet to come. The big question on his mind was, how long could he keep up the charade? And more importantly, when the truth came out, would his true self be enough to win not just the kingdom, but the heart of a princess? The great hall of the palace shone with sunlight through the colorful stained glass windows when Prince Ali was introduced to the Sultan. The chubby, good-natured ruler was immediately charmed by the young visitor, especially after Aladdin presented him with a golden mechanical watch that the genie had conjured up. "Extraordinary, simply extraordinary," exclaimed the Sultan, examining the gift with sparkling eyes. "You must know my daughter, Jasmine. She's not interested." Jasmine's firm voice echoed through the hall as she entered, her tiger Raja following her faithfully. Her eyes met Aladdin's, and for a moment, something familiar seemed to pass between them. Jafar watched the scene from the shadows, his fingers gripping his staff with increasing strength. "Just another insignificant prince," he muttered to Yardo. "But there's something about him that bothers me." Determined to impress the princess, Aladdin approached with an elegant bow. "Your Highness, I know you must be tired of suitors, but I ask only for a chance to prove myself." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the unusual humility in his words. "And how do you intend to do that, Prince Ali?" With a confident smile, Aladdin held out his hand. "How about a walk? I promise to show you a whole new perspective of Agrabah." The magic carpet was waiting on the palace balcony, disguised as an ordinary carpet. When Jasmine hesitantly accepted Aladdin's hand and climbed onto it, her eyes widened in surprise as she watched him gently levitate. "Trust me," whispered Aladdin, words that echoed a distant memory in Jasmine's mind. The carpet took off smoothly, carrying them beyond the palace walls. The city stretched out below them like a living map, the streets winding between the buildings like golden rivers under the setting sun. Jasmine couldn't contain her admiration, her fingers entwined firmly in Aladdin's. "It's incredible," she sighed, as they flew over the rooftops where, unbeknownst to her, Aladdin used to sleep. "I've never seen Agrabah like this." As they flew, Aladdin began to show a surprisingly intimate knowledge of the city and its people. He pointed to a small square where children played, told stories about the market traders, and shared secrets that only someone who lived on the streets could know. "How do you know so much about the lives of ordinary people?" Jasmine asked, her curiosity growing. Aladdin hesitated, his heart torn between the truth and the need to maintain his charade. "I believe that a true leader must know all aspects of his kingdom, not just the palaces." As night fell, they landed on a distant rooftop, sharing a simple meal that Genius had discreetly provided. The stars began to dot the dark sky, and conversation flowed naturally between them. "You know," said Jasmine, "you're different from the other princes. There's something about you that reminds me of..." She stopped, studying his face more closely. Aladdin's heart raced. "Reminds you of what?" "Someone I met at the market," she replied slowly. "A young man who helped a child in need." Before Aladdin could reply, an eerie glow caught his eye. In the palace, red lights emanated from the tower where Jafar's chambers were located. The vizier was busy with his own plot. "The staff is almost ready, Iago," Jafar muttered, adding ingredients to a bubbling cauldron. "Soon, its hypnotic power will be strong enough to control even the Sultan." Back on the roof, Jasmine and Aladdin shared a moment of contemplative silence. "Ali," she finally said, "sometimes I feel like I'm trapped in a life I didn't choose. Do you understand that?" Aladdin felt the weight of his own lie. "More than you know," he replied softly. "Sometimes appearances can be deceiving." When they returned to the palace, something had changed between them. Jasmine no longer saw just a suitor, but someone who seemed to truly understand her. And Aladdin, despite the guilt growing in his chest, was more in love than ever. The genie, who watched discreetly as he became a star in the sky, sighed, "Ah, young love, so beautiful and so complicated." That night, as Aladdin walked through the palace gardens, lost in thought about Jasmine, a shadow moved in the darkness. Jafar emerged from the bushes, his staff glowing menacingly. "Impressive demonstration, Prince Ali," he said with false cordiality. Or should I say, Aladdin? Aladdin's blood ran cold in his veins. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but you do." Jafar smiled mischievously. "The street rat I found in the Cave of Wonders. I wonder what the princess would say if she knew the truth about her precious prince." Aladdin kept his composure, even though his heart was pounding frantically. "Your accusations are as empty as your loyalty to the Sultan." Jafar's smile only widened. "Be careful, boy. You're not the only one with secrets in this palace." With those words, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Aladdin with an even heavier burden on his heart. In his makeshift room, Aladdin found the genie playing chess with himself. "Genie, what do I do? I can't keep lying to her." The genie paused his game, looking seriously at his friend. "The truth is a funny way of coming out, Al. The longer you wait, the more painful it will be." But before Aladdin could consider a confession, a guard rushed into his chambers. "Prince Ali, the Sultan requests your immediate presence in the throne room. It's about the princess." Aladdin's heart raced as he ran through the palace corridors. As he entered the throne room, he found a disturbing scene. The Sultan was in a trance, his glazed eyes fixed on the red glow of Jafar's staff. Jasmine was handcuffed, guards holding her tightly as she struggled. "Ah, Prince Ali, how nice of you to join us." Jafar smiled mischievously. "Or should I say, the street rat? Dad, wake up. Jafar is controlling you." Jasmine shouted, but the Sultan remained motionless. "The Sultan has seen the truth about his favorite suitor," Jafar proclaimed, his voice echoing through the hall. "A liar, a common thief who dared to pass himself off as royalty." "It's a lie." Aladdin advanced, but guards quickly surrounded him. Abu, still in elephant form, tried to help, but Jafar turned him back into a small monkey with a flick of his staff. "The magic!" Jasmine gasped, realizing. "So you're not really a prince?" The look of disappointment in Jasmine's eyes went through Aladdin like a dagger. "Jasmine, I can explain." "Guards," Jafar ordered, "take this imposter to the dungeons. The sentence for deceiving the royal family is death at dawn." As he was dragged away, Aladdin saw the genie floating invisibly near the ceiling, his expression anguished. He could use his second wish to escape, but that would mean leaving Jasmine and the kingdom in Jafar's hands. In the dungeons, chained to the cold wall, Aladdin finally let the weight of his lies fall on his shoulders. Abu snuggled up next to him, trying to comfort him. "I've ruined everything, Abu," he whispered. "I should have told you the truth from the start." A familiar blue glow filled the cell as the genie appeared. "It's not over yet, Al. You still have 2 wishes. What kind of person would I be if I used magic to solve my problems again?" Aladdin replied bitterly. "That's how this mess started. Sometimes, Al, the real magic isn't in the wishes, but in what we do with them," the genie said wisely. Just then, the magic carpet slid through the bars of the cell window, bringing with it a surprise. "Jasmine, you have 1 minute to explain everything to me," she said firmly, her eyes shining with a mixture of anger and hope. "The truth is, I'm just Aladdin, a thief of the streets," he confessed, finally setting his heart free. "I found a magic lamp, and the genie turned me into a prince because I wanted to be worthy of you. But I realized too late that true nobility doesn't come from titles or wealth." "The boy from the market," Jasmine whispered, the pieces falling into place. "It was you all along." Before they could continue, they heard footsteps approaching. "Jafar is using dark magic to control your father," Aladdin explained quickly. "He wants the throne for himself. And I have proof." The genie appeared, transformed into a detective with a magnifying glass. "That chatty parrot of his can't keep a secret." Jasmine nodded determinedly. "We need to stop him." "But how?" "I have a plan," Aladdin smiled, his old adventurous spirit returning. "But it will require all of us to work together." In the throne room, Jafar savored his imminent triumph, forcing the hypnotized sultan to sign decrees that would make him the new ruler. Iago flew around in circles, humming about his future as a royal parrot. Suddenly, the doors opened. Jasmine walked in, seemingly submissive. You win, Jaffer. I agree to marry you. Excellent choice, princess. Jaffer smiled victoriously, not noticing the magic carpet gliding silently behind him. Meanwhile, Aladdin, freed by one of the genie's tricks, was sneaking around the pillars of the hole. The plan was simple: distract Jaffer long enough to break his staff, the source of his hypnotic power. But before the wedding, Jasmine continued, approaching seductively. Wouldn't you like to see how you look with the crown? Jaffer's ego couldn't resist the temptation. When he reached out to take the crown Jasmine offered, Aladdin jumped up, grabbing the staff. Jaffer roared, his mask of sophistication falling away completely. In the ensuing struggle, the staff slipped out of both their hands, shattering as it hit the ground. A wave of magical energy swept through the hole, releasing the Sultan from his trance. Guards, arrest the traitor, the Sultan ordered, finally aware of Jaffer's treachery. But Jaffer had one last card. If I can't take the throne by cunning, I'll take it by force. He pulled out the lamp he had stolen from Aladdin during the confusion. Genie, my first wish. Make me the most powerful being in the world. Aladdin shouted, but it was too late. The genie, forced to obey, transformed Jaffer into an all-powerful sorcerer. The vizier grew to the ceiling, his black robes turning into gloomy smoke. Now, let's see who the real ruler of Agrabah is. Jaffer thundered, launching bolts of energy that turned everything they touched into black gold. In the midst of the chaos, Aladdin realized something crucial. Jasmine, he shouted over the roar of magic. Do you trust me? Their eyes met through the magical storm, and in that moment, all lies and disguises disappeared. I do, she replied. Then hold on tight. Aladdin whistled, and the magic carpet caught them in mid-flight, dodging Jaffer's attacks as they executed the final part of the plan. Why are you running away from me? Jaffer roared. On the most powerful being in the world? Almost that, Aladdin teased. The genie is even more powerful. He gave you your powers, and he can take them away. Jaffer's eyes shone with understanding and greed. Yes, yes, genie, my second wish. Make me an all-powerful genie. The genie covered his eyes, not wanting to see, but compelled to fulfill the wish. Jaffer began to transform, his body growing and changing until he became a colossal red genie. The power, the absolute power. Jaffer laughed, not noticing the black lamp that materialized at his feet, nor the golden chains that began to bind his wrists. You forgot something, Jaffer, Aladdin shouted. Geniuses have a lot of power, but zero freedom. No, Jaffer shouted when he realized the trap, being sucked into his own lamp along with Iago, would try to escape too late. With Jaffer defeated, peace returned to the palace. The Sultan, impressed by Aladdin's bravery and intelligence, declared that the law was wrong. His daughter should have the right to marry whomever her heart chose. And now, Jasmine asked, entwining her fingers in Aladdin's. Now, he smiled, picking up the genie's lamp. There's one more thing I need to do. Turning to his blue friend, he declared, Genie, I wish you freedom. With a flash of light and the sound of chains breaking, the genie's bracelets fell off, and his smoke-shaped legs turned into real feet. For the first time in millennia, he was truly free. Ow, the genie smiled, tears in his eyes. You are a true prince, not by magic or title, but by your heart. And so, under the starry sky of Agrabah, Aladdin and Jasmine discovered that true love doesn't need disguises or magical wishes, just the courage to be who you really are. The icy wind blew across the snowy plains of Midgard, carrying with it the ancient whispers of the stories the elders told about the magnificent bridge that connected the world of men to the golden realm of the gods. Astrid, a young warrior with hair as red as fire and eyes as green as the aurora borealis, watched the horizon with a crystalline glow of the Bifrost cut through the sky. Ever since she was a little girl, Astrid grew up listening to stories about Heimdall, the divine guardian who stood vigilant at his golden post, his eyes able to see every leaf that moved in the 9 worlds and his ears so sharp that they could hear the wool growing on the sheep. Stories had always fascinated her, but never as much as at that moment, when her small village was facing a threat that seemed beyond mortal comprehension. Mysterious shadows had begun to materialize at the edge of the nearby forest, creatures that didn't belong in Midgard, and that brought with them a cold unlike normal winter, a cold that froze the very soul. The elders whispered that they were harbingers of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, but Astrid refused to accept that the end was near without at least trying to do something about it. It was during one particularly dark night that she met Eric, a mysterious traveler who arrived in the village carrying with him an unusual knowledge of the ancient runes and the secret paths between the worlds. His golden eyes seemed to hold ancient secrets, and his presence caused a mixture of fascination and distrust among the locals. The ancient barriers between the worlds are crumbling, Eric explained during a meeting in the communal hall, his deep voice echoing off the wooden walls as the fire crackled in the central fireplace. What you've been seeing are just the first signs of something much bigger approaching. Astrid realized that Eric was no simple traveler when she saw him trace runes in the air that glowed momentarily before dissolving like mist. There was something divine about his presence, something she couldn't explain, but which resonated with the stories her grandmother used to tell about the Aesir, the gods who inhabited Asgard. The shadows began to grow bolder, venturing closer and closer to the houses at night. Children disappeared, cattle were found frozen in the fields, and a blanket of fear began to cover the village like an icy shroud. That's when Eric revealed his true purpose there. There is a way to stop this, he told Astrid privately, as they both watched the aurora borealis dance across the night sky, its colors reflecting similarly to those of Bifrost. But it will require a journey to Asgard, and I can't do it alone. The revelation that Eric was actually an emissary of Odin, sent to find a mortal worthy of crossing the Bifrost, struck Astrid like a bolt from the blue. The ancient prophecy spoke of a time when the worlds would need to unite to avoid their premature destruction before the appointed time for Ragnarok. Why me? Asked Astrid, her heart pounding at the prospect of walking across the rainbow bridge, of seeing the golden realm of the gods with her own eyes. Because you still believe, replied Eric simply. When everyone else lost faith, you kept the flame of the old stories alive in your heart. What's more, you carry in your veins the blood of the ancient seers, those who could see through the veils between the worlds. The revelation about her own lineage surprised Astrid, but it explained the strange dreams she had always had, the occasional visions that had haunted her since childhood. Her grandmother, before leaving for Odin's Hole, had told her that one day she would understand her true purpose. While Eric explained the dangers of the journey that awaited them, Astrid watched the horizon where the Bifrost occasionally flickered. Crossing the bridge would not simply be a matter of walking over it. The structure itself was alive in its own way, responding only to those who are worthy and burning anyone else who dared to attempt the crossing without permission. Heimdall is watching us right now, said Eric, his golden eyes reflecting the northern lights. He knows we've come and why we are here, but even with his approval, the journey will not be easy. There are ancient forces that do not wish mortals to reach Asgard, even if it is to prevent a catastrophe. The shadows in the forest seemed to grow thicker with these words, as if responding to the mention of their existence. Astrid felt the weight of responsibility fall on her shoulders. It wasn't just her village that was in danger, but the entire fabric that held the 9 worlds in balance. When do we leave? She asked, her determination growing with each passing moment. At dawn, Eric replied, when the first rays of sunlight touched the Bifrost, turning it into a path of liquid fire across the heavens. It will be our best chance of making the crossing without being noticed by those who want to stop us. That night, while the village slept, Astrid prepared for the journey that would change not only her life, but potentially the fate of all 9 worlds. In her room, she packed only the essentials, some provisions, a small dagger she had inherited from her grandmother, and an amulet with ancient runes that she had always carried with her. The weight of what was to come kept her awake, her thoughts turning to all the stories she had heard about Asgard, about the gods, and their eternal battles against the forces of chaos. Now she would be part of those stories, for better or worse. Before the first ray of sunlight touched the horizon, Astrid was already on her feet, adjusting the small leather bag on her back. Eric was waiting for her at the edge of the village, his tall, imposing silhouette outlined against the still, starry sky. The air was colder than usual, and a thick mist covered the ground like a ghostly carpet. "The shadows are restless," Eric murmured, his golden eyes scanning the darkness of the forest. "They know what we intend to do." Astrid followed his gaze and noticed subtle movements among the trees, as if the darkness itself were alive and aware. They began their journey in silence, following an ancient path that few still knew. Eric explained that it was one of the ancient routes used by pilgrims who, in ancient times, sought the blessing of the gods. As they advanced, Astrid noticed that the stones along the path were marked with runes worn away by time. "Each rune is a prayer," explained Eric, touching one of the markings with reverence, "and also a warning. Not everyone who has attempted this journey has survived to tell the tale." His words made Astrid shudder, but they didn't diminish her determination. The sun was just beginning to rise when they reached a circular clearing, perfectly formed as if it had been designed by divine hands. In the center, a circle of ancient stones formed an intricate pattern that Astrid recognized from her grandmother's stories. It was an anchor point, a place where the Bifrost occasionally touched Midgard. Eric began to trace runes in the air, this time with more complexity than Astrid had ever seen before. Each symbol glowed with its own light before connecting to the others, forming a web of golden energy that hung over their heads. The air began to vibrate with an ancient and powerful energy. "When the Bifrost descends," Eric instructed, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "you will only have a few moments to cross. The bridge will recognize your ancient blood, but it will still be dangerous. Don't look down, don't stop walking, and above all, don't doubt." The first ray of sun broke through the horizon, and with it came a spectacle that Astrid would never forget. The Bifrost descended from the sky like a cascade of colors, its sparkling crystals reflecting every color imaginable, and some she didn't even know existed. The impact of the bridge touching the stone circle made the ground tremble beneath their feet. But they weren't alone. The shadows of the forest condensed, taking on more defined shades. Ancient, malevolent creatures that moved like black smoke towards them. Eric drew a sword that glowed with a light of its own, positioning himself between Astrid and the creatures. "Run," he shouted, his voice thundering with divine power. "I'll keep them busy. You need to get to Asgard." Astrid hesitated only for a moment before starting her run towards the bridge. Her feet touched the crystals of the Bifrost, and she immediately felt the ancient power flowing through her. It was like walking on solidified light, each step sending ripples of energy through the structure. The wind held around her, carrying echoes of ancient voices and fragments of long-forgotten stories. Through the storm of colors and sounds, she could hear the sounds of battle below, Eric facing the dark creatures with his gleaming sword. As she climbed, Midgard fell behind, and Astrid found herself crossing the stars themselves. The cold of the space between the worlds was unlike anything she had ever experienced, but the ancient blood in her veins protected her, keeping her warm and aware. Suddenly, one of the dark creatures managed to escape from Eric and started climbing up the Bifrost after her. Astrid could feel its evil presence approaching, the unnatural cold emanating from the creature, threatening to freeze her footsteps. She remembered Eric's words, "Don't stop, don't doubt." Instinctively, she touched the amulet around her neck, and the ancient runes engraved on it began to glow. A wave of heat spread through her body, and she heard a cry of pain behind her. The Bifrost crystals had responded to her presence, burning the creature from the shadows that had dared to pursue her. In front of her, through the veil of rainbow colors, Astrid began to glimpse something that made her heart stop for a moment. The golden gates of Asgard, shining with a light that was not of this world. In there, an imposing figure awaited her arrival. Heimdall, the Guardian, his golden armor reflecting the colors of the Bifrost. The air became thinner, and each step required more effort. Astrid could feel the weight of the distance between the worlds, reality itself distorting around her. But she pressed on, driven by the urgency of her mission and the knowledge that Eric was still fighting below to ensure her passage. The voices on the wind became clearer. They were the whispers of the gods, watching her journey, judging her courage and determination. Astrid kept her eyes fixed on the goal, even as tempting visions and unimaginable terrors danced in the periphery of her vision, trying to distract her from the path. Finally, with one last effort, Astrid reached the golden platform where Heimdall was waiting. The guardian of the worlds was even more impressive than the stories described, tall as a mountain. His golden skin reflected the light of Asgard's suns, and his eyes contained the knowledge of ages. "Welcome, daughter of Midgard." His voice rang out like distant thunder. "We have long awaited your arrival." Heimdall turned his omniscient gaze to the Bifrost, where Eric could still be seen fighting against the shadows. With a flick of his golden sword, a wave of light descended across the bridge, scattering the creatures of darkness. Eric emerged moments later, his form changing subtly as he ascended, his mortal disguise shedding to reveal Tyr, the god of justice and war. Astrid felt her heart skip a beat as she realized that she had been traveling all this time in the company of a deity. "The shadows are becoming bolder," observed Tyr, joining them on the platform. "They've never tried to follow someone through Bifrost before." His golden gaze met Astrid's. "You proved your worth on the crossing, young seer." Heimdall gestured and a portal opened before them, revealing a path that led to the heart of Asgard. Astrid could barely take in the magnificence of what she saw. Palaces of gold and crystal floated among amber clouds, connected by bridges of light. Trees with silver leaves swayed in a wind that carried ancient melodies, and in the sky, unknown constellations danced in hypnotic patterns. "The father of all awaits in Valhalla," announced Heimdall. "He wishes to hear personally about the shadows that threaten Midgard." Astrid felt the weight of responsibility grow on her shoulders. She was about to meet Odin, the most powerful of the gods. As they walked through the streets of Asgard, Einarjar warriors bowed their heads in respect to Tyr and looked curiously at the mortal woman who accompanied them. Valkyries flew overhead on their winged horses, their silver armor glittering in the eternally golden light of the divine realm. "The shadows that have plagued your village," Tyr explained as they advanced, "are fragments of something much older and more dangerous. Something that should remain dormant until the real Ragnarok." His expression turned grim. Someone is trying to awaken forces that should remain sealed. Astrid absorbed every detail around her, from the runes that pulsed on the walls of the buildings to the ravens of Odin that occasionally crossed the sky. "Why now?" she asked. "Why choose our village?" "Your village holds ancient secrets," replied Tyr. "Its very existence is no coincidence. The seers of your lineage were appointed as guardians long ago, even if they have forgotten their purpose." They approached Valhalla, a palace so vast that it seemed to touch the stars themselves. Its doors, made of interlaced golden shields, opened silently at their approach. Inside, the hall seemed to stretch on endlessly, with thousands of tables where fallen warriors feasted eternally. The path took them to Odin's throne, where the father of all was waiting. His one eye shone with ancient wisdom, and two ravens, Hugin and Munin, perched on his shoulders. At his side was Frigg, his wife, whose gentle gaze somewhat reassured Astrid's nervousness. "The daughter of the seers returns to Asgard." Odin's voice filled the hall. "After so many generations, the ancient blood awakens again." He stood up, his cloak of stars floating around him. "But time is cruel to us. The shadows you saw are only the beginning." Frigg approached Astrid, gently touching her face. "Your grandmother served the gods well, child. She knew this day would come and prepared for it in the only way she could, by keeping the old stories alive." "What's really going on?" Astrid found the courage to ask. "Why are the barriers between the worlds weakening?" Odin made a gesture, and the air between them turned into a web of images. the 9 worlds connected by Yggdrasil, the world tree. Something is eating away at the roots of reality itself, he explained. An ancient curse, sealed millennia ago, is being awakened before its time. Loki, whispered Tyr, and the name seemed to make the flames of the torches tremble. Yes, confirmed Odin. Even in his chains, he has found a way to spread his chaos. His agents work in the shadows, weakening the seals that maintain the order of the worlds. Frigg took Astrid's hands between his. That's why you were brought here? The blood of the seers carries an ancient magic capable of strengthening the barriers between worlds. But to fully awaken this power, you will need to undertake a dangerous journey. A journey into the nether realms, Odin added, his eyes shining brightly. To find the source of the corruption and seal it away again before it's too late. Astrid felt the weight of fate on her shoulders, but also a growing determination. Her grandmother's stories, the vision she'd always had, her natural instinct to protect, it all made sense now. She was part of something bigger, a crucial piece in a battle that spanned the ages. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. Odin rose from his throne and walked over to an ancient tapestry that covered one of Valhalla's walls. With a gesture, the woven images came to life, revealing a deep cavern in the far reaches of Niflheim, the realm of darkness and eternal mist. The source of corruption is there, he explained, where the deepest roots of Yggdrasil touch the primordial void. Loki has found a way to poison these roots through his agents, but only someone with the blood of the seers can reach this place without succumbing to the madness that permeates those depths. Frigg led Astrid to a side altar, where 3 objects rested, a dagger with runes engraved on its blade, a vial containing a liquid that glowed like liquid stars, and a necklace with a crystal that seemed to contain an aurora borealis inside. These are sacred tools, said the goddess, forged at the dawn of time for moments like this. The dagger can cut through the veils between worlds. The elixir will keep your essence intact in the depths. And the necklace? She paused meaningfully. The necklace contains a spark of Bifrost itself, capable of illuminating even the deepest darkness. Tyr approached, his presence emanating strength and determination. I will accompany you to the gates of Niflheim, but beyond that point, you must go alone. The ancient laws are clear. Only the blood of seers can directly interfere with the roots of the world tree. As Astrid absorbed all this information, a sudden tremor shook the whole. Through the windows of Valhalla, she saw strange ripples running through the fabric of reality, as if the very air was shattering. Time is running out, Odin declared gravely. The shadows are growing stronger. If the roots of Yggdrasil are completely corrupted, the 9 worlds will begin to disintegrate. Heimdall, who had remained silent until then, spoke. The barriers between the worlds are thinner than they have ever been. I can see the shadows moving even in the most sacred corners of Asgard. Astrid took the 3 sacred objects, feeling the ancient power that emanated from them. The necklace, when it touched her skin, emitted a soft glow that seemed to resonate with something in her own blood. The dagger had a comforting weight in his hand, and the flask emanated a gentle warmth. How will I know what to do when I get there? She asked, the reality of her mission beginning to weigh on her shoulders. Your blood will know, Frigg replied softly. Seers have always carried the necessary knowledge in their own souls. When the time comes, you will understand. Odin made a gesture, and part of the whole transformed, revealing a dark portal that seemed to suck in the very light around it. This is the way to Niflheim, he explained. Through it, you and Tyr will be able to travel quickly to the limits of that dark realm. Before they could leave, Frigg took Astrid's hands once more. There is something else you should know, said the goddess, her voice laden with concern. In the depths of Niflheim, you will find more than shadows and corruption. You will find truths about your own lineage, about the true purpose of the seers. Be prepared to face these revelations. Astrid nodded, sensing that there was much more to the goddess' words than she was revealing. Tyr placed a hand on her shoulder, signaling that it was time to leave. One last thing, said Odin, his eyes shining brightly. In the depths, you will hear voices, You will see tempting or terrifying visions. Remember, not everything your eyes see or your ears hear is real. Trust your blood, the ancestral knowledge that runs through your veins. With these words of warning echoing in her mind, Astrid followed Tyr towards the portal. Darkness immediately enveloped them, and she felt as if she were falling through an endless abyss. The necklace around her neck glowed brighter, creating a protective bubble of light around her. The journey through the portal was like sailing through an ocean of shadows. Occasionally, Astrid glimpsed fragments of other worlds through cracks in reality. The fiery forges of Muspelheim, the icy halls of Jotunheim, the mysterious depths of Svartalfheim. Each vision lasted only an instant before being swallowed up again by darkness. Tyr stayed close, his divine presence serving as an anchor in the storm of chaos that surrounded them. Keep your focus, he instructed. Nibelheim will try to confuse your senses from the moment we arrive. It's a realm of illusions and eternal mist. As they advanced, Astrid began to feel a change in the air around them. The cold became more intense, more penetrating, and the darkness began to give way to a thick, gray mist. They were approaching their destination. The portal opened onto a desolate plain covered in a perpetual mist that snaked around them as if it had a life of its own. The ground beneath their feet was a mixture of ice and black rock, and the air carried indistinct whispers that seemed to come from every direction. "Here we part," said Tyr, his imposing figure contrasting with the bleak landscape. "Follow the call of your blood. It will guide you to the corrupted roots." His golden eyes met Astrid's one last time before he disappeared into the mist. Alone in Nibelheim, Astrid felt the full weight of her mission. The necklace around her neck pulsed gently, its light creating a faint path through the darkness. She began to walk, using the sacred dagger to cut through the webs of mist that tried to surround her. Odin's words echoed in her mind as she advanced. Not everything she would see or hear would be real. This warning proved vital when the first illusions began to manifest. He saw his village in flames, heard the cries of its inhabitants, but the pulse of ancient blood in his veins showed him the truth behind the visions. The terrain began to descend, taking her deeper and deeper into the realm of shadows. The walls of the cave that appeared in front of her were covered in ancient runes that glowed faintly, as if responding to her presence. Some she recognized from her grandmother's stories, others seemed older than language itself. As she descended, the roots of Yggdrasil began to appear, running through the rocky walls like gigantic veins. But something was wrong. Dark spots spread across them like a disease, and a black, viscous liquid dripped from their wounds. It was then that the voices began, no longer indistinct whispers, but clear words that promised power, knowledge, the ability to change the fate of the 9 worlds. Astrid recognized this as another attempt to confuse her and reach for the vial of star elixir, taking a small sip that instantly cleared her mind. In the heart of the cave, she found what she was looking for, a nexus where several of Yggdrasil's main roots met. At the center of this confluence, a shadowy figure worked, his hands emanating an evil energy that seeped into the roots. It was one of Loki's agents, a creature who had once been a dark elf before giving himself over to corruption. "I was expecting you, daughter of the seers," the creature spoke, its voice a mixture of several different voices. "Have you come to try and stop the inevitable?" Astrid held up the sacred dagger, its glow intensifying in the presence of the darkness. "It's not inevitable," she replied. "Ragnarok has its own time, and it's not now." The creature laughed, a sound that made the very roots tremble. "Your lineage was always so presumptuous, thinking they could maintain the natural order of things. But do you know why you were really chosen? Why did the gods entrust this power to mortals?" Before Astrid could react, visions flooded her mind. She saw the first seers, saw how they were created not just to protect, but to serve as living anchors, keeping reality stable through their own suffering. He saw his grandmother, carrying the weight of this knowledge in silence until the end. "They made you slaves," the creature continued, living chains to maintain their precious order. But something in the visions caught Astrid's attention. It wasn't slavery she saw, but a choice. The first seers had accepted their role voluntarily, understanding the importance of balance between the worlds. Her grandmother didn't carry a burden, but a purpose. The ancestral knowledge in her blood awoke fully, and Astrid finally understood what she needed to do. She lifted the necklace containing the Bivras spark, its glow intensifying until it was almost blinding. The sacred light of the rainbow bridge was anathema to the shadows, and the creature recoiled with a cry of pain. Taking advantage of this moment, Astrid began to sing, not an ordinary song, but an ancient chant that arose naturally from her ancestral memories. The runes on her dagger responded, glowing in sync with her singing, and she began to trace symbols in the air that materialized in pure light. The creature tried to stop her, casting shadows that were dispersed by the glow of the necklace. Yggdrasil's roots began to pulse with new energy, responding to the power of the seer's blood. The corruption began to recede, burned away by the sacred light emanating from the symbols that Astrid continued to trace. With one fluid movement, she drove the dagger into the center of the nexus of roots, completing the circle of runes. A wave of energy exploded from the point of impact, purifying the roots and dispelling the shadows. The creature let out one last scream before collapsing in a black mist. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft pulsing of the now healed roots. Astrid felt the ancient power ebb away, leaving her exhausted but satisfied. She had fulfilled her purpose, not as a slave of the gods, but as a guardian by choice. The path back to the surface seemed shorter, as if Niflheim itself recognized her victory and helped her on her journey. Tyr was waiting for her where they had parted, a smile of approval on his divine face. "The barriers between the worlds are already beginning to strengthen," he said. "Not only have you prevented corruption, but you have also fully awakened the power of your bloodline." When they returned to Asgard, Astrid was greeted like a true hero. Odin and Frigg were waiting for her in Valhalla, along with Heimdall and the other gods. But her thoughts were already in her village, with the people who needed her protection. "Your place is in Midgard," said Frigg gently, noticing her thoughts. "But now you fully understand your role as guardian." Astrid nodded, feeling at peace with her destiny. She returned to her village not just as an awakened seer, but as a living bridge between the worlds, ready to maintain the balance and protect the ancient stories that she now knew were much more than just tales. The shadows had retreated, but she knew that other threats would come, and when they did, she would be ready, carrying with her the knowledge of the ancients and the strength of her own choice to be a guardian of the 9 worlds. The sun was setting on the horizon, dyeing the sky blood red over the imposing walls of Troy. 10 years had passed since the first Greek ships touched the city's shores, bringing with them an army thirsty for revenge and glory. Agamemnon, the mighty king of Mycenae, looked down on the fortified city from the top of a nearby hill, his face marked by scars and the weight of a decade of fruitless war. Next to him, Odysseus, known for his cunning and unique intelligence, gazed at the walls with a peculiar gleam in his eyes. His fingers drummed unconsciously on the hilt of his sword while his keen mind worked on yet another of his ingenious plans. The sea wind stirred his dark robes, bringing with it the smell of salt and the distant echo of the waves breaking on the beach. 10 years, my dear Odysseus," murmured Agamemnon, his voice laden with bitterness. 10 years of our lives wasted before these walls that seemed to laugh at our impotence. His eyes scanned the Greek camp spread across the plain below, where thousands of tents stretched as far as the eye could see. Troop morale was at its lowest, and whispers of giving up were beginning to spread like a plague among the soldiers. It was at this point that Odysseus, with an enigmatic smile, shared his idea. What if we could get the Trojans themselves to invite us in? His seemingly absurd proposal soon began to take shape in calculated words and precise gestures. The plan of the wooden horse was born there, under the bloody sky of Troy. Within the city walls, life was taking its tense but routine course. Priam, the venerable king of Troy, walked through the palace gardens accompanied by his daughter Cassandra. whose eyes always seemed to see beyond the present. The young prophetess carried with her the weight of a curse, the gift of predicting the future, but never being believed. "Father," she whispered, her eyes fixed on a distant point on the horizon, "I see shadows approaching our walls. They are not shadows of open warfare, but of deceit and betrayal." Priam, as always, only smiled indulgently, attributing his daughter's words to his fertile imagination. After all, the Greeks seemed as worn out as themselves after a decade of unresolved conflict. Hector, Troy's greatest warrior and Priam's eldest son, supervised the training of the troops in the main courtyard. His younger brother, Paris, whose abduction of Helen had triggered the whole war, watched from a distance, carrying the weight of the guilt he never openly admitted. Helen, for her part, remained in her quarters, her legendary beauty still able to dim the sun's glare, but her eyes bore the melancholy of someone who knew she was the cause of so much suffering. In the Greek camp, the construction of the horse began under the utmost secrecy. Epius, the most skilled carpenter among the Greeks, led a select team of craftsmen. The sound of hammers and saws echoed day and night, camouflaged by other camp noises so as not to arouse suspicion. The horse gradually took shape, a majestic structure as tall as 3 men, with enough space inside to house dozens of chosen warriors. Meanwhile, Odysseus personally selected the men who would take part in the riskiest mission of their lives. Each chosen warrior knew that the chances of success were as uncertain as the chances of survival. Among them were Diomedes, known for his boundless bravery, and Neoptolemus, son of the late Achilles, who was eager to prove his worth. As the plan developed, the tension in the Greek camp grew proportionally. Some veterans questioned the wisdom of the strategy, considering it a last act of desperation. Others, however, saw it as the only real hope of victory after years of failure. Laocoon, a Trojan priest devoted to Poseidon, began to have disturbing dreams. In his night visions, he saw Troy consumed by flames while a giant horse watched the destruction with empty eyes. His attempts to warn the city council were often met with skepticism, as were Cassandra's prophecies. The air was full of foreboding. Birds flew in strange formations over the city, and the sea seemed rougher than usual. The gods, high up on Mount Olympus, watched with renewed interest as events unfolded, some cheering for the Greeks, others for the Trojans, but all eager to see how that decade of conflict would come to an end. The construction of the horse progressed, and with it grew the expectation among the Greeks. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the exact moment to present the offering to the words that would be spoken to convince the Trojans of its authenticity. The structure was adorned with religious symbols and inscriptions dedicated to the goddess Athena, a calculated attempt to appeal to the Trojans' piety and religiosity. In the city, routine continued, but there was a growing unease in the air. Warriors on the walls reported strange movements in the Greek camp, although nothing that could be clearly identified as a threat. The population, exhausted from a war that seemed to have no end, longed for any sign that the conflict might be coming to an end. The horse was taking shape not only as a physical structure, but as a symbol of hope for the Greeks and, unknowingly, as a harbinger of destruction for the Trojans. Its shadow was already casting itself over the fate of both peoples, even before its conclusion, marking the beginning of a new phase in the decade-long war. As the sun rose over the Greek camp, the last details of the huge wooden horse were being finalized under the close supervision of Epius. The craftsmen circled the structure with critical eyes, checking every joint, every fitting, ensuring that his creation was not only convincing in appearance, but also safe for the warriors who would soon hide inside. Odysseus gathered the warriors selected for the mission in his tent. The atmosphere was charged with tension as he explained the final details of the plan. Each man had to memorize his specific position on the horse and the exact moment of his action. A mistake, no matter how small, could cost not only their lives, but the entire operation. "Remember," said Odysseus, his voice low but firm, "when we are inside the walls of Troy, silence will be our greatest weapon. A whisper, a cough, any sound can give us away. His eyes traveled over the faces of the chosen men, finding in each of them the determination needed for the mission. Among the warriors, Diomedes organized small combat groups, assigning specific responsibilities for when the time came for action. Some would be responsible for eliminating the guards, others for opening the main gates, and a special group would head straight for the royal palace. In the camp, preparations began for the staging of the departure. Tents were dismantled for two purposes. Some would actually be taken to the ships, others would be hidden in the nearby hills, where the army would wait for the signal to return. The movement had to look genuine in the eyes of the Trojan lookouts. Inside Troy, Cassandra walked restlessly through the corridors of the palace. Her visions were becoming more intense and disturbing. In her dreams, she saw wooden horses crying tears of blood and heard the screams of her burning city. He tried to warn everyone he met, but as always, his words were met with polite smiles and looks of pity. Laocoon, sharing the same concerns, sought an audience with King Priam. The priest argued that the gods had sent him signs of imminent danger. "My king," he pleaded, "Poseidon stirs the waters with unusual fury. The sacrifices show dark omens. We must redouble our vigilance." Priam, although he respected the priest's devotion, was tired of living under the constant cloak of fear. "For 10 years we have kept our walls impregnable," he replied gently. "If the Greeks leave, it will be a blessing from the gods, not a curse." In the Greek camp, Agamemnon coordinated the logistics of the false retreat. Ships were prepared ostentatiously, loaded with supplies and equipment in full view of the Trojans. The smoke from the campfires gradually diminished, creating the illusion of an army in the process of abandoning the siege. Neoptolemus, eager to prove his worth, trained tirelessly with other chosen warriors, practicing silent movements and combat techniques in confined spaces. The young warrior carried not only the weight of his own ambition, but also the legacy of his father, Achilles. As the day progressed, an atmosphere of expectation hung over both sides of the conflict. The Greeks, knowing his plan, could hardly contain their anxiety. The Trojans, watching their enemies' movements from the walls, began to speculate on the meaning of his apparent retreat. Helena, from the top of her tower, watched the movement in the Greek camp with a mixture of contradictory emotions. Part of her longed for an end to the conflict that her beauty had sparked, while the other part feared the consequences of any change in the current stalemate. Paris, always by her side, tried to comfort her, although his own doubts consumed him. Odysseus' plan included an additional element of persuasion. Sinon, a Greek warrior known for his ability to manipulate, would be left behind. His task was to convince the Trojans of the authenticity of the offering and the departure of the Greeks. For days, Sinon rehearsed his story, perfecting every detail of his fictional narrative. When night fell over the camp, the chosen warriors performed silent rituals of preparation. Some sharpened their weapons one last time, others made discreet offerings to the gods. In the remaining tents, quiet conversations mingled with the sound of the sea, carrying promises of glory or omens of destruction. Ebu made the final adjustments to the mechanism that would allow the warriors to get off the horse. Every hinge was oiled, every lock tested with extreme care to ensure that it would work silently when the crucial moment arrived. The craftsman was aware that his work could determine the success or failure of the entire operation. The crescent moon illuminated the Greek camp as the final preparations were made. Tomorrow, the horse would be presented to the Trojans, and the fate of 2 nations would be sealed. There was a feeling in the air that the gods were watching intently, ready to witness the outcome of a war that had already lasted a whole decade. Dawn brought with it the moment that would define the fate of Troy. The huge wooden horse, gleaming in the first rays of the sun, was carefully transported to its strategic position in front of the city gates. Sinon, the man in charge of convincing the Trojans, waited nervously, mentally rehearsing his elaborate story. Inside the horse, the chosen Greek warriors stood in absolute silence, their hearts beating hard against their armor. Odysseus, strategically positioned next to the opening mechanism, transmitted orders through previously agreed gestures. The space was cramped and the heat gradually increased with the morning sun. On the walls of Troy, the watchmen observed the movement on the beaches with growing curiosity. The Greek ships, with their unrefined sails, looked ready to set sail. The sight of the huge horse provoked different reactions among the defenders. Some saw it as a sign of the Greeks' surrender, while others remained skeptical about the enemy's true intentions. Cassandra, in her chambers, was seized by a vision so intense that she fell to her knees. "Fire," she murmured repeatedly. "I see fire consuming our city." Her servants, used to her prophecies, tried to calm her down, but this time there was something different in her voice, an urgency that could not be ignored. Watching the horse on the wall, Laocoon felt a shiver run down his spine. Something about that monumental structure was arousing his most primitive instincts of danger. Determined to confirm his suspicions, he started down the steps of the wall, determined to examine the supposed offering more closely. Inside the horse, Diomedes controlled his breathing, trying to ignore the growing claustrophobia. Next to him, Neoptolemus could barely contain his youthful anxiety, but was constantly calmed by the stern looks of the more experienced warriors. The slightest noise could jeopardize the entire operation. Sinon, carrying out his part of the plan, approached the gates of Troy with his hands raised in surrender. His story was meticulously prepared. He would talk about his quarrels with Odysseus, how he had been abandoned, and the true nature of the horse as an offering to the goddess Athena to guarantee his safe return to Greece. King Priam, informed of the situation, summoned his council to an emergency meeting. Opinions were divided. Some advocated accepting the gift as a sign of peace, others argued for caution. Helen, present at the meeting, remained strangely silent, her eyes fixed on the horizon through the palace windows. Laocoon, arriving at the place where the horse was positioned, began to examine it carefully. His fingers roamed over the carved wood, looking for some sign that would confirm his suspicions. Inside the structure, the Greek warriors held their breath, tense at the proximity of the priest. The tension reached its peak when Laocoon, convinced of the danger, picked up a spear and hurled it at the horse's flank. The sound reverberated through the structure, causing moments of controlled panic among the hidden warriors. Luckily, the spear hit a specially reinforced part, producing only a hollow sound. "It's a trap," shouted Laocoon to the crowd that was beginning to form. "The Greeks would never offer us a gift of peace. We must destroy this structure immediately." His words were beginning to gain traction among some of those present, threatening the entire Greek plan. It was at this crucial moment that an unexpected event changed the course of events. Two huge serpents emerged from the sea, advancing rapidly towards Laocoon and his two sons who were standing nearby. The scene that followed was one of horror. The serpents enveloped the priest and his sons, silencing their warnings in a deadly embrace. The Trojans interpreted this event as a divine sign, a punishment from Athena for Laocoon's desecration of her offering. The fear of the gods overcame any remaining fears, and the decision to accept the horse within the walls was practically unanimous. Meanwhile, the Greek ships moved away from the coast, apparently abandoning the siege once and for all. In reality, they were only heading to a predetermined point, out of sight of the Trojans, where they would wait for the signal to return. The sun was beginning to set when the Trojans finally decided to bring the horse inside the walls. Part of the main gate had to be knocked down to accommodate the monumental structure, a detail that did not go unnoticed by the warriors hiding inside. The city was in a celebratory mood. Years of war seemed to have come to an end, and the horse was positioned in the main square as a symbol of Trojan victory. Wine flowed freely, music echoed through the streets, and even the most cautious began to relax their suspicions. Cassandra, in a last desperate effort, ran to the main square. "It is our destruction that we celebrate," she shouted across the festive crowd. "The belly of this horse carries our death." As always, his words were ignored, lost amid the sounds of festivity. Inside the horse, the Greek warriors endured the heat and discomfort, patiently waiting for the right moment. Odysseus kept an eye on the sounds outside, calculating the best moment to act. Night had to fall completely, and the city had to be plunged into the deep sleep of celebration. Night fell over Troy while the celebrations continued in the streets. The wine flowed abundantly, and the sounds of music and laughter echoed through the corners of the city. The warriors on horseback remained motionless, their muscles sore from the uncomfortable position, but their minds alert and focused on the mission. Odysseus watched the movement of the torches outside through a small window, calculating the perfect moment to act. Gradually, the voices began to diminish and the footsteps became slower, clear signs that exhaustion and drink were finally overcoming the partygoers. In the palace, Priam retired to his chambers, satisfied with the apparent end of the conflict. Helen, however, couldn't sleep. Something in the atmosphere that night deeply disturbed her. From the window of her chambers, she watched the silhouette of the horse against the starry sky, an unsettling presence in the familiar landscape of the city. Cassandra wandered the halls of the palace like a tormented spirit. Her visions were now so vivid that she could barely distinguish between reality and premonition. In every shadow, she saw Greek soldiers emerging. In every nocturnal noise, she heard the harbinger of imminent destruction. Inside his horse, Neoptolemus felt a drop of sweat trickle down his forehead. The young warrior fought the urge to move, remembering Odysseus' words about the importance of absolute silence. Next to him, Diomedes stood like a statue, his experience in battle translated into an enviable calm. The hours dragged by like an eternity for the hidden warriors. The air inside the horse became heavier and heavier, and the space seemed to shrink with each passing moment. Some men prayed silently to the gods, others concentrated on their breathing, controlling their growing anxiety. Outside, the last of the partygoers finally succumbed to exhaustion. Sleepy guards made their rounds less rigorously than usual, confident that the war was over. The city gradually sank into a deep silence, interrupted only by the occasional bark of a dog or hoot of an owl. Odysseus waited until the moon reached its highest point in the sky. It was the moment they had agreed to start the operation. With precise, silent gestures, he began to transmit orders to his men. The opening mechanism was activated with extreme care, producing only a slight creak that was lost in the night. One by one, the warriors began to descend from their horses, moving like shadows in the darkness. Their armor had been carefully wrapped in cloth to minimize any metallic noise. Diomedes led a group towards the main gates, while Neoptolemus and others headed for strategic points in the city. In the palace, Cassandra woke up startled from an uneasy sleep. Her eyes widened in the dark as she heard almost imperceptible sounds coming from the main square. She ran to alert the guards, but her words, as always, were met with disdain and irritation. The Greek warriors moved with calculated precision, silently eliminating the few guards they found in their path. Years of training and planning showed in every coordinated movement, in every precise and deadly blow. Diomedes and his group reached the main gates without encountering any significant resistance. The locking mechanisms were methodically removed, paving the way for the army waiting in the shadows beyond the walls. A torch signal was discreetly sent out, visible only to eyes that knew where to look. On the distant beach, the Greek ships began their silent return, propelled by rowers who kept their oars wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound of contact with the water. Agamemnon, on board the main ship, watched the sleeping city with a mixture of anticipation and satisfaction. Inside Troy, the operation continued with lethal efficiency. Neoptolemus and his men had taken up crucial positions, eliminating guard posts and preparing for the moment when the rest of the army would enter the city. The young warrior felt the blood of his father, Achilles, boiling in his veins, eager to prove his worth in the battle to come. Helena, still awake in her quarters, was the first to notice that something was wrong. The silence of the night had become different, denser, more threatening. When she looked out of the window again, she noticed furtive movements in the shadows of the square. But before she could shout a warning, the first wave of the Greek army was already passing through the open gates. The attack began as a deadly whisper and quickly turned into a roar of war. The Trojans, drunk and unprepared, awoke to find their city already partially taken. The sound of metal against metal began to echo through the streets, mingling with cries of surprise and terror. Odysseus, watching the chaos unfold as planned, headed with a select group towards the royal palace. His aim was to capture Priam and the main Trojan leaders before they could organize any kind of effective resistance. The stratagem he had devised was finally bearing fruit, turning 10 years of stalemate into a decisive victory in a matter of hours. The night that had begun in celebration was quickly turning into a nightmare for the Trojans. The wooden horse, now empty, stood like a silent sentinel in the square, witnessing the fall of the city that had remained invincible for so long. Cunning had triumphed where brute force had failed, and the fate of Troy was sealed. The flames began to spread across Troy, illuminating the night with an eerie glow. Odysseus' plan had worked with devastating precision, and now the city that had resisted for a decade was succumbing in a matter of hours. The cries of battle mingled with the wails of the citizens, creating a chaotic symphony of destruction. Priam, awoken by the tumult, rushed to the throne room. His personal guards, still dazed, were trying to organize a belated defense of the palace. The old king watched with growing horror as his invincible city was taken from within. Through the palace windows, he could see the wooden horse, now an empty silhouette against the burning sky, a monument to his own naivety. Neoptolemus, thirsting for glory and revenge, led a group of warriors through the halls of the palace. His path was marked by ruthless violence, eliminating any resistance he encountered. The young warrior sought to prove himself worthy of the legacy of his father, Achilles, surpassing him in ferocity. Helena, trapped in her chambers, watched as Greek soldiers stormed through the palace. Her beauty, which had launched this war, now seemed insignificant in the face of the horror unfolding before her. Paris tried to protect her, but was quickly subdued by more experienced Greek warriors. The prince who had once defied the gods for love now lay wounded, unable to defend the one he had risked everything for. Cassandra, in the midst of the chaos, ran through the corridors shouting, "I told you so, I told you so." Her prophecies finally confirmed in the most terrible way possible. Her words, previously ignored, now mingled with the screams of terror and the crackling of the flames consuming the city. Ajax the Lesser, on spotting her, began a relentless pursuit through the corridors of Athena's temple. Odysseus, maintaining his characteristic strategic calm even in the midst of battle, coordinated groups of warriors to ensure that no important member of the royal family escaped. His plan was not just limited to conquering the city, it included the complete elimination of Priam's lineage to avoid future revenge. In the palace courtyard, Diomedes and his men faced the last organized resistance from the Trojan guards. The Greek warrior demonstrated why he was considered one of the most lethal in his army, his precise and deadly movements discouraging any attempt at a counterattack. Priam, seeing his city fall, took refuge at the altar of Zeus with some members of his family. The old king, who had once ruled one of the most powerful kingdoms in the known world, was now reduced to begging the gods for protection. Neoptolemus, finding him there, showed no mercy. The sacred altar was stained with royal blood, a sacrilege that would not go unnoticed by the gods. Andromache, Hector's widow, was desperately trying to protect her son Astyanax. She knew that the Greeks would not allow any male heir of Priam's line to survive. Her maternal love led her to try to hide the boy, but the Greek soldiers were systematic in their search. The streets of Troy became a maze of terror and destruction. Citizens ran in panic, seeking refuge in temples and sanctuaries that would soon be desecrated. The Greek warriors, drunk on victory and thirsty for revenge, made no distinction between combatants and civilians. The Greek army waiting outside the walls now flooded the city in successive waves. Agamemnon, arriving in the center of the city, gazed with wild satisfaction at the realization of his decade-long goal. The fall of Troy would be remembered for generations as a testament to both Greek ingenuity and the fragility of power. Meanwhile, in the lower streets of the city, systematic looting began. Treasures accumulated over generations were plundered, temples were stripped of their riches, and the population was subjected to all kinds of violence. The code of warrior honor that had prevailed during the 10-year siege was giving way to unbridled brutality. Odysseus, observing the destruction his plan had unleashed, felt a mixture of pride and regret. His cunning had ensured Greek victory, but the price in lives and the level of destruction exceeded even his darkest expectations. The flames that consumed Troy illuminated not only the end of a city, but also the end of an era. Dawn found Troy unrecognizable. The walls that had been her pride for so long were now stained with blood and soot. The wooden horse stood in the main square, a silent witness to the transformation of a divine gift into an instrument of destruction. The Trojan survivors, those who had not been killed or enslaved, watched helplessly as their city was systematically destroyed. The women of the royal family, including Cassandra and Andromache, were divided up as booty among the victors, their fate as bleak as that of the city they had once called home. When the sun finally rose fully over the smoking ruins, the magnitude of the destruction became clear. Troy, the city that had held out for 10 years against the greatest army ever assembled, had fallen not by force of arms, but by the cunning of a single plan. The wooden horse would remain in the memory of future generations as an eternal symbol of how intelligence can triumph where brute force fails, and how misplaced trust can lead to total destruction. The gods, from the top of Mount Olympus, watched the outcome of their mortal interferences and disputes. The fall of Troy marked not only the end of a war, but the beginning of a new era of stories and legends that would be told and retold through the centuries, reminding everyone that even the mightiest cities can fall in the face of well-planned cunning. In the small Italian village of Carlodi, where cobbled streets meandered between old houses and the scent of fresh bread mingled with the smell of freshly cut wood, there lived a carpenter called Geppetto. His small workshop, illuminated by the golden light coming in through a dusty window, was his refuge and workplace. The walls were decorated with meticulously organized tools, and pieces of wood of different sizes and textures waited patiently to be transformed into something special. Geppetto was known for his exceptional ability to create wooden toys that delighted the children of the village. His kind eyes, framed by thick gray eyebrows, shone when he saw the joy on the little ones' faces when they received his creations. However, behind that gentle smile, there was a deep loneliness that had accompanied him for years. One particularly cold night, while the stars twinkled in the dark sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet, Geppetto found a special piece of wood in his workshop. It was a pine log that seemed to pulsate with a mysterious energy. His experienced hands caressed the smooth surface, and he felt something different, something magical. Tonight, he muttered to himself, I'm going to create something truly special. With his tools in hand, he began to carve. The hours passed as he worked tirelessly, shaping what would become his most ambitious project, a life-size doll of a boy. As the night wore on, every detail came to life under his skilled hands. The expressive eyes, the delicate nose, the articulated limbs. Geppetto worked with such love and dedication that, without realizing it, he began to talk to his creation as if it were already real. You will be my son, he whispered, putting the finishing touches to the doll. I'm going to call you Pinocchio. It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. A silver blue glow filled the workshop and an ethereal figure materialized. It was the Blue Fairy, a magical creature of incomparable beauty. Her hair fluttered like silk in the wind, even though there was no breeze in the room. Geppetto, her melodious voice echoed through the workshop. Your pure heart and sincere love have touched the realm of magic. Tonight, your wish will be granted. With a graceful flick of her wand, the fairy cast an enchantment over the wooden doll. Tiny sparks of light danced around Pinocchio, and, to Geppetto's amazement, the puppet began to move. First, the toes twitched, then the knees bent, and finally, the wooden eyes blinked, revealing a glimmer of life. Dad, was the first word that came out of Pinocchio's wooden lips, making Geppetto's heart overflow with joy. The blue fairy, however, had an important warning. Pinocchio can become a real boy, but first he must prove his worth. He must learn the difference between right and wrong, be brave, honest, and selfless. It was then that a little cricket, who had always inhabited Geppetto's workshop, also received a special gift from the fairy. Transformed into a talking cricket, he would be Pinocchio's conscience, a guide on his journey to becoming real. "I'll always be close by," said the talking cricket, adjusting a small hat and an elegant coat that magically appeared on his body to help Pinocchio make the right choices. In the days that followed, Geppetto discovered that raising a wooden child had its own unique challenges. Pinocchio, although full of life and curiosity, also showed a worrying tendency to get into mischief. His impulsive and naive nature led him into tricky situations, and his facility for lying soon manifested itself in a very peculiar way. His wooden nose grew with every lie he told. Remember, Pinocchio constantly warned the talking cricket, the truth is always the best way. Every lie not only makes your nose grow, but also takes you away from your dream of becoming a real boy. Collodi's village was soon abuzz with the presence of the living puppet. Some people welcomed him with fascination and affection, while others looked on with suspicion. For Pinocchio, every day brought new discoveries and temptations. The world beyond Geppetto's workshop was vast and full of wonders, but also of dangers that the naive puppet didn't yet understand. One day, when Geppetto decided it was time for Pinocchio to start his education, a new phase of challenges began. The idea of going to school aroused conflicting feelings in the puppet. On the one hand, there was the desire to learn and make his father proud. On the other, the distractions of the outside world were too tempting. "You need to study to grow up wise and good," explained Geppetto, preparing a small bag with school supplies he had bought with his savings. Education is the first step to becoming a real boy. As Pinocchio prepared for his first school adventure, the talking cricket watched with a mixture of hope and concern. He knew that the road to Pinocchio's transformation would be long and full of trials. The puppet would have to learn to resist temptation, distinguish true friends from false ones, and, above all, remain faithful to the truth. The blue fairy, although no longer visible, kept a watchful eye on her magical creation. Pinocchio's fate lay in his own wooden hands, and his choices would determine whether he would achieve his dream of becoming a real boy or remain forever an animated puppet. The next morning, Pinocchio adjusted his little wooden tie and, with his bag of materials on his back, set off for school. The morning sun cast long shadows over the cobbled streets as Geppetto proudly watched his wooden son walk away from the workshop. Talking Cricket discreetly followed a few steps behind, determined to keep a watchful eye on his protege. The road to school was full of tempting distractions. The sweet aroma coming from the bakery made Pinocchio pause momentarily, his wooden nose sniffing the air with curiosity. Across the street, a group of children were playing with colorful spinning tops, their laughter echoing through the quiet morning. With each new distraction, the talking cricket gently reminded him of his mission. "Remember, Pinocchio," whispered the cricket, "school is where you have to go. Your father worked hard to buy your materials." On arriving at school, Pinocchio was greeted with a mixture of amazement and curiosity by his new classmates. Some approached fascinated, gently touching his wooden skin, while others kept their distance, whispering among themselves. The teacher, a kind lady called Dona Rosa, welcomed him with a warm smile, although her eyes revealed a hint of surprise at seeing a wooden puppet among her students. "Welcome, Pinocchio," she said, leading him to an empty desk. "I hope you're ready to learn." The first few hours of class were a challenge for the restless puppet. His wooden fingers struggled to hold the pencil correctly, and the creaking of his joints sometimes distracted the other pupils. But Pinocchio struggled on, remembering the hopeful look on Geppetto's face when he had sent him to school. During break time, Pinocchio met two boys, Romeo and Franco, who seemed particularly interested in making friends. They invited him to sit with them and shared their snacks, something the puppet couldn't reciprocate since he didn't need to eat. Pinocchio, said Romeo with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "Have you heard about the Stromboli Puppet Theater? It's in town today." "Puppet theater?" asked Pinocchio, his wooden eyes widening with curiosity. "Yes," continued Franco. "It's the greatest show there is. It has music, dancing, and puppets that seem to have a life of their own. Just like you." Talking Cricket, who was watching the conversation from his nearby hiding place, felt a tightening in his chest. He knew that kind of conversation well, and where it usually led. "But what about school?" asked Pinocchio, a small wrinkle of concern forming on his wooden forehead. "Oh, the school will be here tomorrow," said Romeo with a shrug. "But the theater? It leaves tonight. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." The rest of the school day passed like a blur for Pinocchio, his mind divided between the duty of studying and the temptation of the theater. Talking Cricket tried to intervene whenever he could, whispering words of caution, but the seed of adventure had already been planted in the puppet's wooden heart. When the bell rang announcing the end of school, instead of going home, Pinocchio found himself following Romeo and Franco towards the center of town, where a large, colorful tent stood in the main square. "Pinocchio, think again," implored the Talking Cricket, jumping frantically to his side. "Your father will be worried, and the school." But the puppet was mesmerized by the sound of the music coming from the tent, the glare of the lights, and the buzz of the crowd. His wooden heart beat faster with the excitement of the adventure ahead. Inside the tent, the spectacle was even more impressive than Romeo and Franco had described. Puppets danced and sang, performing impossible acrobatics in the air. Pinocchio watched with wide eyes, completely oblivious to his responsibilities. It was then that Stromboli, the master of ceremonies, a burly man with an exuberant mustache and calculating eyes, noticed something special in the audience, a wooden puppet that moved without strings. His eyes lit up with greed as he imagined the possibilities. "How wonderful!" exclaimed Stromboli, approaching Pinocchio after the show. "A puppet that moves by itself. You be the star of my show." Pinocchio was flattered by the attention. The idea of becoming a star, of having people applaud and admire him, was too tempting to resist. Talking Cricket desperately tried to make his voice heard amid the excitement of the moment. "But what about Geppetto?" reminded Cricket. "What about his dream of becoming a real boy?" Meanwhile, in his workshop, Geppetto looked anxiously out of the window, waiting for his wooden son to return. The hours passed, and his worry grew by the minute. He didn't know that his little Pinocchio was about to embark on an adventure that would test not only his courage, but also his loyalty and honesty. Night was beginning to fall on Carlotti, and Pinocchio's choices would set him on a path full of consequences he couldn't yet imagine. The theater of Stromboli held dark secrets behind its colorful curtains, and the wooden puppet was about to discover that not all glitter is gold. Stromboli led Pinocchio backstage, showing him the dressing rooms full of hanging puppets and glittering costumes. The wooden puppet was amazed by it all, imagining himself on stage, being applauded by hundreds of people. The businessman, with his deep voice and grandiose gestures, painted a tantalizing picture of fame and fortune. "Imagine, my young friend," said Stromboli, his eyes shining with ill-concealed ambition. "You will be the greatest attraction this theater has ever seen. A puppet that moves without strings. The audience will love it." Talking Cricket, who was watching everything from a dark corner, felt his little heart squeeze with worry. He knew that kind of seductive promise well, and was desperately trying to make his voice heard. "Pinocchio, think of your father," begged Cricket. "Geppetto must be worried to death." But the puppet was too bewitched by the promise of glory to listen to the advice of his conscience. Stromboli presented a contract, vaguely explaining its terms while pointing to where Pinocchio should sign. "It's just a formality," assured the businessman, his smile not reaching his eyes. "You'll be rich and famous." His hands shaking with excitement, Pinocchio signed the contract without reading it, hardly realizing that he had just committed himself to something much more serious than he had imagined. Romeo and Franco, who had disappeared discreetly during the conversation, reappeared only to receive a few coins from Stromboli, their reward for bringing yet another attraction to the theater. Pinocchio's first show was a resounding success. The audience was enchanted by the puppet who danced, and sang without the need for strings. His natural movements and genuine expressions provoke sighs of admiration and enthusiastic applause. For a few hours, Pinocchio felt truly special. However, after the show, when he tried to go out to visit Geppetto, he discovered the true nature of his deal with Stromboli. The businessman locked him in a metal cage, revealing his true face. "You belong to me now, doll," growled Stromboli, his once mellifluous voice now filled with cruelty. "That contract you so happily signed gives me all rights to you." Pinocchio's wooden heart sank. Tears of regret streamed down his face as he realized the terrible mistake he had made. Talking Cricket, who had managed to sneak into the cage, tried to console him. "Oh, Cricket," sobbed Pinocchio, "why didn't I listen to your advice? Now I'll never see my father again. I'll never be able to go to school. I'll never become a real boy." As the night progressed, the circus began to move on to the next town. The cart carrying Pinocchio's cage bumped along the dark roads, each kilometer increasing the distance between him and his beloved father. Meanwhile, in Col Lodi, Geppetto searched frantically for his son. He roamed the dark streets of the town, knocking on every door, asking everyone he met if they had seen his precious wooden doll. His voice, hoarse from calling for Pinocchio, echoed through the empty streets. In the moving cage, Pinocchio tried to think of a way to escape. It was then that he had an idea. Perhaps he could convince Stromboli to let him go just for a short visit to his father. "Mr. Stromboli," he called out as the businessman passed by, "can I just pay my father a quick visit? I promise I'll be back." "Your father," laughed Stromboli sarcastically. "A piece of wood doesn't have a father. You just property my property." At that moment, Pinocchio's nose began to grow. Not because he had lied, but because he had promised something he knew he wouldn't keep. The sudden growth of his nose surprised Stromboli, who took a frightened step backwards. Talking Cricket, seeing an opportunity, quickly whispered to Pinocchio, "Use that to your advantage. Maybe we can find a way to escape." The puppet understood the plan. He began to tell deliberate little lies, making his nose grow longer and longer until it extended beyond the bars of the cage. With each new lie, the nose grew even longer, creating a kind of lever that began to force the prison bars. Stromboli watched in horror as the metal bars began to crack under the pressure of the growing nose. With a final snap, the cage opened, and Pinocchio, taking advantage of the confusion, leapt to freedom, with the Talking Cricket clinging tightly to his clothes. They ran off into the night, chased by the furious screams of Stromboli and his assistants. The wooden puppet had never run so fast in his life, his jointed limbs creaking with the effort. The Talking Cricket guided him through the darkness, helping him to pick his way back home. The full moon illuminated their path as they got deeper and deeper into the forest that surrounded the road. The sounds of the chase gradually subsided, until all that was left was the silence of the night and the soft rustle of their footsteps on the dry leaves. Exhausted and regretful, Pinocchio finally stopped to rest under a large tree. His nose, still elongated from his lies, slowly began to return to its normal size as he admitted his mistakes to himself and to the Talking Cricket. "I've learned my lesson," he said softly. "I'll never disobey my father or ignore his advice again, Cricket. Now I just need to find my way back home." Talking Cricket smiled gently, happy to see that his protege was finally understanding the value of honesty and obedience. But little did they know that their adventure was far from over, and that new challenges awaited them in the darkness of the forest. The darkness of the forest seemed to swallow Pinocchio and the Talking Cricket as they tried to find their way back home. The trees, with their twisted branches, cast eerie shadows in the moonlight, and mysterious sounds echoed everywhere. The wooden puppet, still recovering from its escape from the Stromboli theater, pressed its arms against its body, feeling the weight of real fear for the first time. "Cricket," whispered Pinocchio, his voice trembling slightly. "Are you sure we're going in the right direction?" Talking Cricket, sitting on his protege's shoulder, tried to remain calm, although he was also worried. "Well, the stars can guide us," he replied, looking up at the sky through the treetops. "But this forest is denser than I imagined." As they walked, they encountered other forest creatures, owls that watched them with glowing eyes, foxes that sneaked through the bushes, and even some fireflies that, for a moment, reminded Pinocchio of the theater lights that had bewitched him hours before. Suddenly, they heard children's voices and distant laughter. An orange light flickered between the trees, and the smell of roasting food hung in the air. Pinocchio, hungry for company, immediately wanted to investigate, but Talking Cricket held him back. "Careful, Pinocchio," he warned. "We've been in enough trouble for one day." But the puppet's curiosity was stronger. Approaching silently, they discovered a clearing where several boys were gathered around a campfire. It was a peculiar group, children of different ages, all with expressions of rebellious joy on their faces. "Look at that!" exclaimed one of the boys, pointing to Pinocchio. "A puppet that walks." Before they could run away, they were surrounded by the group. To Pinocchio's surprise, the children showed no fear or repulsion, but genuine interest. The leader of the group, a boy called Lampwick with tousled red hair and a sly smile, approached. "Welcome to the land of pleasures," announced Lampwick, bowing exaggeratedly. "Here, there are no rules, school, or adults to tell us what to do." Talking Cricket immediately realized the danger, but Pinocchio was fascinated. The boys told stories about a magical place where children could do whatever they wanted, eat sweets all day, play endlessly, and never have to study or work. "Come with us," insisted Lampwick. "A magical wagon will pick us up at dawn. In the land of pleasures, you'll be free." The wooden doll felt torn. The promise of endless fun was tempting, but the memory of Geppetto's worried face haunted him. Talking Cricket seized this moment of hesitation to intervene. "Pinocchio, remember what happened the last time you followed strangers," he whispered urgently. "Think of your father." But the children kept trying to convince him, showing him toys, sweets, and games they had brought with them. The scent of roasted marshmallows and the sound of happy music filled the air, making it harder and harder to resist. "Just one night," thought Pinocchio, "just to find out what it's like." As the evening progressed, the puppet found himself joining in the fun, momentarily forgetting his worries. Talking Cricket watched apprehensively, noticing something strange in the other children's behavior. Their laughter seemed increasingly wild, their movements more uncontrolled. As the first rays of the sun began to tint the sky, a distant sound of bells and wheels caught everyone's attention. A colorful and ornate wagon emerged from the morning mist, pulled by creatures that looked like a mixture of horses and shadows. "It's time," shouted Lampwick, running towards the wagon. "Call me on, Pinocchio. The land of pleasures awaits us." The puppet hesitated, looking alternately at the fantastic wagon and in the direction where he imagined his home would be. The Talking Cricket begged him to make the right choice. "Please, Pinocchio," pleaded the cricket. "Don't make another mistake. Your father." But before he could finish, a gust of wind swept across the clearing, and the car driver, a hooded figure with eyes that glowed like coals, stretched out a skeletal hand towards the children. It was then that Pinocchio witnessed something terrible. As his new friends climbed into the cart, their shapes began to change. Pointed ears sprouted from their heads, their noses turned into snouts, and bushy tails tore at their clothes. They're turning into donkeys," cried Pinocchio, horrified. Talking Cricket tugged hard on the sleeve of his clothes. "Run, Pinocchio! Run now!" Without a second thought, the puppet shot off into the forest, the sound of braying and maniacal laughter echoing behind him. Branches and bushes whipped his wooden body as he ran faster and faster, the Talking Cricket clinging tightly to his neck. Their desperate escape took them deeper into the forest, but this time Pinocchio didn't care which direction. He just wanted to get as far away from that terrible scene as possible. His wooden heart beat fast, and for the first time, he truly understood the value of the Talking Cricket's warnings and his father's teachings. The sun continued to rise in the sky, lighting his way through the forest that seemed to have no end. Exhausted but determined, Pinocchio knew he had to find his way back home to his father, to the safety and love he had left behind in search of empty adventures. Dawn found Pinocchio and the Talking Cricket exhausted, but still moving through the forest. The frightening sounds of the magic wagon had finally ceased, leaving only the chirping of morning birds and the soft rustling of leaves. The wooden puppet, although tired, felt a new determination growing in his heart. He had to find his way back to Geppetto. "You know, Cricket," said Pinocchio as they walked, "ever since I came to life, I've caused my father nothing but worry. First school, then the Stromboli Theater, and now this." His voice shook slightly as he remembered the children turning into donkeys. The talking Cricket, who had remained silent for most of the escape, adjusted his little hat and replied wisely, "The important thing is not the mistakes we make, Pinocchio, but what we learn from them." As they made their way through the forest, they began to notice subtle signs of civilization, a better defined trail, some marks on trees, and eventually, the distant sound of a stream that Pinocchio recognized from nearby Carlodi. Hope was reborn in their hearts. However, the way back still held one last challenge. As they approached the stream, they heard cries for help coming from the water. Running to the shore, they saw something that chilled their hearts. Geppetto was in a small boat that had capsized in the strong current. "Dad," cried Pinocchio, his wooden heart almost stopping at the sight of his father struggling against the turbulent waters. "He must have gone out to look for you," exclaimed the talking Cricket, jumping up anxiously. Without a second's hesitation, Pinocchio dived into the water. Being made of wood, he floated naturally, but the current was strong and threatened to sweep him away. With determined strokes, he swam towards his father, who was already showing signs of tiredness. "Pinocchio!" shouted Geppetto when he saw his son approaching. "Careful, my son. The current is too strong." The puppet struggled against the water, using his natural lightness to reach Geppetto. When he finally reached him, he slung an arm around his father and began to swim back to the shore. The extra weight made progress more difficult, and Pinocchio could feel the water soaking his wood, making his movements heavier. Talking Cricket, on the shore, organized a group of forest animals to help. Squirrels stretched out long branches, birds flew low offering guidance, and even a beaver quickly began to build a small dam to slow down the current. With an extraordinary joint effort, Pinocchio managed to bring his father to the shore. They both fell exhausted onto the grass, Geppetto coughing up water and Pinocchio feeling his wooden limbs heavier than ever. "My son," said Geppetto between gasping breaths, "I've been looking for you everywhere. When I heard about a wooden puppet in the traveling theater—" "Oh, father," interrupted Pinocchio, tears streaming down his wooden face. "Forgive me. I've been such a fool. I disobeyed, I lied, and I almost turned into a donkey. All you wanted was to give me education and love, and all I did was cause trouble." To his surprise, Geppetto hugged him tightly, not caring about the water dripping off his sun-soaked wood. "The important thing is that you're here now, and that you've learned from your mistakes." At that moment, a familiar blue glow began to envelop Pinocchio. The blue fairy materialized before them, her gentle smile lighting up the damp forest. "Pinocchio," her melodious voice echoed, "you have finally understood the value of truth, courage, and family love. By risking your own life to save your father, you have proved yourself worthy of the gift you so desperately wanted." With a flick of his wand, loose sparks danced around the wooden puppet. Pinocchio felt a strange warmth spreading throughout his body, starting with his heart. His wood began to transform, becoming soft skin and real hair. His painted eyes came to life, and his nose, the nose that had so often given him away, became an ordinary boy's nose. Geppetto watched in amazement as his wooden son transformed into a real boy before his eyes. The talking Cricket jumped for joy, and the forest animals celebrated with trills and whistles. I'm real," exclaimed Pinocchio, touching his face and arms in amazement. "You've always been real in your heart," said the blue fairy. "Now your exterior only reflects the truth that was inside you." The journey home was full of joy. Geppetto wouldn't let go of his son's hand, now warm and alive, and the talking Cricket followed them, proud of his role in Pinocchio's journey of transformation. When they arrived in Carlodi, they found the town exactly as they had left it, but everything looked different to the new Pinocchio. The school, which had once seemed like a prison, now represented an opportunity for growth. The temptations of the street, which once led him astray, now seemed small in the face of the joy of being true and honest. In Geppetto's workshop, While his father prepared hot soup for them to recover from their adventure in the stream, Pinocchio looked out of the window at the starry sky. The same sky that had witnessed his antics was now watching a boy transformed not only in appearance, but in spirit. "Cricket," Pinocchio called softly, "will you continue to be my conscience?" Talking Cricket, who was settled in his favorite spot on the tool shelf, smiled. "I'll always be here to help, but now you have your own strong and true conscience. Use it wisely." And so, the puppet who dreamed of being a real boy finally got his wish. Not through simple magic, but through lessons learned, truths accepted, and unconditional love. The story of Pinocchio would become a Call Lodi legend, told through generations as a reminder that honesty, courage, and family love are the true ingredients of the magic that turns dreams into reality.